After I dropped my kid off at school, his teacher cornered me and asked, "Why is your son absent today?" "No, he's not." I just watched him walk inside. Mrs. Stevenson's face went pale. "Well, he didn't make it to my classroom." She looked at her attendance records. "In fact, Theo hasn't made it to my classroom at all for the past 3 weeks." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I stammered out. "I've been dropping him off every morning and staying until I personally see him go in." Mrs. Stevenson hesitated, then picked up her classroom phone. "I think you need to speak with Principal Miles right now." We walked through the hallway in silence. Other teachers kept glancing at us, then looking away quickly. The principal's secretary was already crying when we arrived, like she knew something. Principal Miles had security footage pulled up on his computer. "Come look at this." The screen showed the front entrance. There was Theo, scanning his ID badge at 7:46 a.m., walking toward the classroom with his dinosaur backpack. The timestamp read October 24th this morning. "Mr. Davis, watch what happens next." The camera angle switched to the main hallway. I could see Theo in the morning crowd of kids. He walked toward his classroom hallway, then suddenly veered left toward the gym. The timestamp showed 7:48 a.m., another camera angle, the gym hallway. Theo pushed through the emergency exit door. A man in a hard hat and construction vest was waiting. Theo climbed into a white pickup truck. They drove away. The timestamp, 7:49 a.m. "That's been happening every morning for 3 weeks. Miles's voice was shaking. "We presumed this was authorized. The man said he was Theo's uncle picking him up for family medical appointments." He showed me a folder, dozens of permission slips with my forged signature. "I've been trying to call you, but the number on file was disconnected." That's when Mrs. Stevenson interrupted. "Mr. Davis, there's something else. CPS is coming to your house today at 11 a.m. They received a report about educational neglect. If Theo isn't there, if we can't prove where he's been, you could lose custody." My hands were shaking as I pulled out Theo's phone from my pocket. He'd forgotten it in the car. The screen lit up with notifications. 47 unread messages. All from Uncle Mike. My blood went cold. Uncle Mike was Theo's stepdad's uncle. I opened the messages. "Don't tell your dad. You know what happens if you tell." The last message, sent this morning at 7:30 a.m. "If you don't come today, you'll never see your mom again." I called my ex-wife immediately. Voicemail. I called Derek, the stepdad. No answer. It was already 9:15 a.m., less than 2 hours until CPS arrived. Where would have taken Theo? I drove to Derek's apartment first. The landlord told me he'd left early this morning. I drove to my ex-wife's workplace next. Her boss said she hadn't been in all week. It all seemed super shady. That's when it hit me. Uncle Mike. I didn't know where he lived, but I knew he owned a construction company. I'd be able to confront Mike there. I drove to his main office and burst through the door. "Where's your crew working today?" The secretary looked scared. "Highway 40, the overpass project." I didn't even hesitate, just jumped in my car and started going 90 on the highway. After 35 minutes, I finally saw the construction site. Concrete mixers, bulldozers, the sound of machinery. I parked and ran through the gates, scanning every face, every corner. Looking for Mike so I could ask him what the hell was going on. That's when I saw him, Theo, my 11-year-old son. He was carrying a bag of cement on his small shoulders. His dinosaur backpack was thrown in the dirt. I saw angry red marks on his shoulders. Even worse, there were 5-hour energy drinks in his pocket, the kind that says, "Not for children" on the label. But why was Mike making my son work at a construction site? "Theo!" I called out. He turned and saw me. His face went white. He dropped the cement bag. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "I'm here to collect you, buddy." I walked over to him. That's when he said something that made my stomach turn. "But I can't leave Dad. Derek told me you'll be mad at me unless I work." I was still trying to piece it all together when I heard car doors slam shut. My ex-wife's Honda, Derek's truck. They walked over together, my ex-wife already defensive. "Theo has another 3 hours left on his shift," she said. "3 hours of what?" I asked, grabbing Theo and pulling him behind me. "His shift at the construction site? Where you've been keeping him hostage," I yelled. My ex-wife crossed her arms. "He's learning real skills. He's making us $1,800 a week. Theo's been earning money for his own family instead of wasting time on fractions." My jaw dropped. "You knew?" Of course I knew. It was my idea. What she didn't know was that authorities were on their way. "Derek's uncle needed workers," she continued, "and we needed money for my lawyer, for my custody case, to get Theo away from you forever." She jabbed her finger into my chest. I looked down at Theo. His shoulders were now shaking as he was definitely looking at his mom. "You said you were saving the money I made to buy me a birthday present." "I am," she quickly responded, lying through her teeth. The police showed up right in the middle of all this. The first officer out of the car held up his hand and told everyone to stay where they were. 3 more officers got out and spread across the construction site, moving between the workers and equipment. One officer walked straight to Uncle Mike and started asking questions about who was in charge here. Another officer came over to me and Theo, kneeling down to Theo's level. She asked him if he was hurt anywhere, and Theo nodded, pointing to his shoulders. The officer looked at the red marks, and then noticed the energy drink bottles sticking out of his pocket. She pulled out her radio and called for an ambulance, saying they needed medical evaluation and documentation on site. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, but I forced myself to stay calm and answer questions clearly because I knew losing my temper right now would make me look bad when CPS showed up. The lead officer asked Maya and Derek to step over to one side of the site while he talked to me. Theo kept looking back and forth between me and his mother, like he was trying to figure out who was going to get in trouble for all this. The female officer stayed with Theo, writing notes about his injuries and taking photos with her phone. She explained to me that documenting his physical condition right now was important evidence for whatever came next. I handed the lead officer Theo's phone and showed him all the messages from Uncle Mike. He looked at each one carefully, taking photos of the screen with his own phone. He asked me to email him screenshots as backup and said this was serious evidence, not just a family argument. Derek tried to walk over and interrupt, but the officer firmly told him to wait his turn and stay where he was. Uncle Mike started talking loud about how this was all a big misunderstanding. He said he thought he had proper permission from both parents to give Theo a job. The officer asked to see his employment records and workers' compensation insurance. He also wanted to see the permission slips Uncle Mike mentioned earlier. Uncle Mike's face went pale when he realized they were actually going to investigate his whole business, not just this one situation with Theo. Maya tried a different approach with the officers, saying she was teaching Theo valuable work skills and that lots of kids help out with family businesses. The officer cut her off and explained that an 11-year-old working construction with heavy equipment and dangerous materials was illegal no matter what any parent said. Derek stood behind Maya with his arms crossed, not saying anything but looking more worried by the minute. I could hear the ambulance siren getting closer. It pulled through the construction site gates and 2 paramedics got out with their equipment bags. They came over to where Theo was standing with the female officer. The paramedics examined him carefully, taking photos of every mark and bruise while asking him gentle questions about how he got each injury. Theo admitted he dropped a cement bag on his foot last week. He said his shoulder hurt from carrying heavy loads, but he was told not to complain or he wouldn't get paid. The paramedics looked at each other with serious expressions. They told the officers they wanted to transport Theo to urgent care for a full evaluation and complete documentation. The police agreed this was necessary for the investigation. I asked if I could ride with Theo, and the paramedics said yes. The police stayed behind to secure evidence from the construction site and take statements from Maya, Derek, and Uncle Mike. Theo climbed into the back of the ambulance and I got in next to him. He was quiet and scared, asking me if he was in trouble. He wanted to know if CPS was going to take him away from both of us. I told him he didn't do anything wrong and that I was going to make sure he stayed safe. I was fighting to keep my voice steady, even though I was scared about the CPS visit that was supposed to happen in less than an hour. The ambulance pulled away from the construction site and headed toward the hospital. At urgent care, a doctor came in right away and started examining Theo thoroughly. A nurse stood next to the doctor with a camera and a tablet, documenting everything with photos and detailed notes about each injury. They found bruising on Theo's shoulders that matched carrying heavy loads. There were minor burns on his hands from handling materials. The doctor said Theo showed signs of being really tired and dehydrated. She asked Theo about the energy drinks and looked very concerned when he said Derek gave them to him every morning. The doctor explained to me that giving high caffeine products to a child could affect his developing heart and nervous system. While Theo was examined, I stepped into the hallway and called Principal Miles. I explained what happened and that police were now involved. I asked him to contact CPS and let them know this situation had gone way beyond a simple truancy case. Principal Miles sounded shocked but said he would make the call right away. He promised the school would cooperate fully with any investigation. He also apologized for the old contact information that stopped them from reaching me sooner. The urgent care doctor came out and told me she was completing a mandatory reporter form. She said Theo's injuries and the whole situation clearly meant child abuse and endangerment. She explained that this report would go to CPS and law enforcement, adding to all the documentation that was already piling up. I was grateful they were documenting everything so carefully, even though each new form and photograph felt like proof of how badly I had failed to protect my son. A detective walked into the urgent care waiting area about 20 minutes later. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder under his arm. He introduced himself as Stanley Price and asked if we could talk privately while the nurses finished with Theo's paperwork. We moved to a small consultation room, and he pulled out a recording device after asking my permission. Detective Price explained that this case involved multiple potential charges, including child labor law violations, child endangerment, forgery, and possibly coercion or threats against a minor. He said the threatening texts alone were serious, but combined with everything else, this was a significant criminal case. I handed over Theo's phone, and he photographed each message carefully before placing the phone in an evidence bag. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything that happened today. I walked him through the morning meeting with Mrs. Stevenson and Principal Miles. I described watching the security footage of Theo being picked up every morning. I explained finding the forged permission slips and the threatening texts from Uncle Mike. Detective Price took detailed notes and asked specific questions about the timeline. He wanted to know exactly who said what at the construction site. I told him about Maya admitting it was her idea and that they needed the money for her custody lawyer. His pen stopped moving when I mentioned that. He looked up and asked me to repeat that part about the custody case and the lawyer fees. I explained that Maya has been fighting for custody for almost a year and that she's been struggling financially. Detective Price nodded and wrote something in his notes that he underlined twice. He asked if I had any previous concerns about Maya and Derek's behavior with Theo. I admitted that Theo had seemed more tired lately and sometimes came home with small bruises, but I thought he was just being clumsy at the school. I told him about the old phone number issue and how the school couldn't reach me to verify anything. Detective Price's phone rang while we were talking. He answered it and listened for about 2 minutes. When he hung up, he looked relieved. He told me that CPS had been notified about the police intervention and was converting today's home visit into an emergency safety planning meeting instead. He explained that having law enforcement already involved actually helped my case because it showed I took immediate protective action once I discovered what was happening. A CPS caseworker named Nayeli Garrison would meet us at my house in about an hour to assess the situation and determine next steps. Detective Price said this was much better than having CPS show up expecting to find an absent child and a negligent parent. He finished taking my statement and said he would be in touch as the investigation progressed. The urgent care doctor came back with a folder full of papers and photographs. She explained that Theo was medically cleared to go home, but I needed to watch for any delayed symptoms from the caffeine exposure or physical strain. She handed me copies of all the medical records and photographs. The doctor emphasized that I should keep these safe because they would be important for both the criminal case and any custody proceedings. She also gave me a referral for a pediatrician to do follow-up care in a few days. Theo came out of the exam room looking exhausted. He walked over and grabbed my hand tightly. His grip was so tight it almost hurt, but I didn't say anything. We left the urgent care facility and headed to the parking lot. The drive home took about 15 minutes. For the first few minutes, Theo just stared out the window without saying anything. Then he started talking quietly. He told me what the past 3 weeks were really like. He said Uncle Mike would pick him up every morning right after I dropped him off at the school. They would drive to different construction sites around the county. Theo described waking up at 5 in the morning because he was so worried about being late. He said he worked until 4 or 5 in the afternoon carrying materials and cleaning up debris. Then Uncle Mike would drop him back near school so he could catch the late bus home. I kept my hand steady on the wheel and my voice calm even though I wanted to scream. Theo said Derek told him that if he said anything his mom would disappear, and it would be his fault. He said Uncle Mike showed him pictures on his phone of his mom looking sad and told him she would stay sad unless he kept working. The manipulation made me so angry I could barely see straight, but I kept my voice gentle. I told Theo he was safe now and that he did the right thing by not fighting when I showed up at the construction site. I explained that none of this was his fault and that the adults who were supposed to protect him had made terrible choices. Theo started crying quietly. He said he thought I would be mad at him for missing school. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned to face him. I told him I was not mad at him at all and that I was proud of him for surviving something so scary. We sat there for a few minutes while he cried. Then we continued driving home. We pulled up to my apartment building at the same time as a silver sedan. A woman got out carrying a tablet and a canvas bag. She walked over to us and introduced herself as Nayeli Garrison from CPS. I felt relieved that Theo and I got here first, so we were not walking into an empty house with CPS waiting. Nayeli was professional but not cold. She had a calm voice and kind eyes. She explained that she was here to make sure Theo was safe and had what he needed. She asked if we could sit down and talk through what happened. I invited her inside while Theo went to wash up and change clothes. My apartment is small but clean. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a breakfast bar, and a living room with a couch and TV. Nayeli walked through each room taking notes on her tablet. She checked that Theo had his own bedroom with a bed and dresser. She opened the refrigerator and pantry to see what food we had. She looked at the bathroom to make sure it was clean and had supplies. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and asked me questions about our normal routine. She wanted to know about Theo's school attendance before this incident. I showed her his report cards and attendance records showing he had perfect attendance until 3 weeks ago. She asked about my work schedule and childcare arrangements. I explained that I work second shift at a warehouse and that Theo stays with a neighbor after school until I get home. Nayeli asked to see my pay stubs and lease agreement. I pulled out a folder I keep with all my important documents. She photographed everything with her tablet. She also asked for character references. I gave her the phone numbers for 2 of Theo's previous teachers and our downstairs neighbor who watches him sometimes. Theo came back into the kitchen wearing clean clothes and looking a bit better. Nayeli asked him some gentle questions about how he was feeling and if he felt safe at home with me. Theo nodded and said yes. After about an hour, Nayeli closed her tablet and looked at both of us. She explained that she was creating an emergency safety plan rather than removing Theo from my care. The plan included no contact between Theo and Maya, Derek, or Uncle Mike, except through supervised channels approved by CPS. Theo would need to start therapy to address the trauma. CPS would make unannounced home visits to monitor the situation. Nayeli emphasized that I did the right thing by immediately removing Theo from danger and cooperating with authorities. She said that made a huge difference in her assessment. Before she left, Nayeli pulled out a business card for a child therapy center. She scheduled Theo for an interview at the Child Advocacy Center for tomorrow morning at 9. She explained that this was a child-friendly facility where trained specialists would take his statement about what happened. She said the interview would be recorded and shared with law enforcement and prosecutors, so Theo would not have to testify multiple times. I was allowed to be present in the waiting room, but not during the actual interview. Nayeli said this was standard procedure for cases involving child abuse or exploitation. She packed up her things and reminded me she would be making unannounced visits. Then she left. About an hour later, Detective Price called my cell phone. He said they had secured the construction site and collected extensive evidence. The evidence included work logs, timesheets, vehicle records, and security footage from the site showing Theo working over multiple days. He said Uncle Mike's company records showed several other workers who might be underage, which could expand the investigation significantly. Detective Price also warned me that Maya and Derek had lawyered up quickly. He said I should expect this to get more complicated before it got better. He told me not to have any contact with them and to forward any messages they sent to him immediately. I thanked him and hung up. Theo was already asleep on the couch with the TV playing quietly. I covered him with a blanket and sat down in the chair across from him. Tomorrow we had the interview at the Child Advocacy Center. Then probably more meetings with CPS and police. Court hearings would come eventually, but right now Theo was home and safe. That was enough for tonight. I grabbed my phone and called Principal Miles right then, even though it was past 8 p.m. He answered on the third ring and I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him Theo was home safe and that police were involved. Then I asked him point blank how those forged permission slips were accepted without anyone calling me directly to check. There was a long pause before he admitted their contact verification process had serious gaps. He explained that the office staff was supposed to call parents for early dismissals, but they relied on the contact information in the system, which in my case was outdated. The permission slips looked official and had what appeared to be my signature, so no one questioned them. Principal Miles sounded tired and genuinely upset as he told me the district was launching an internal review of their security and communication protocols. He promised they would cooperate fully with the investigation and implement immediate changes to prevent this from happening to another family. I thanked him, but made it clear I was still angry about how this slipped through for 3 whole weeks. After I hung up, I checked on Theo again. He was still asleep on the couch, his face peaceful for the first time all day. I was just thinking about waking him to move him to his bed when I heard a knock at the door. It was 7:15 p.m. I looked through the peephole and saw Nayeli standing there with her tablet. She smiled slightly when I opened the door and reminded me about the unannounced visits she'd mentioned earlier. I let her in, and she spent the next hour watching our evening routine. I helped Theo with some of the homework he'd missed over the past 3 weeks, simple math problems that he worked through slowly. Nayeli sat quietly at the kitchen table, taking notes on her tablet while we went through fractions and word problems. Then I made us dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce with some frozen vegetables. Theo picked at his food but ate more than I expected. Nayeli observed how I checked if he wanted seconds, how I asked about his day, how I reminded him to brush his teeth after dinner. She watched the bedtime process too, me making sure his room was clean, helping him pick out clothes for tomorrow, tucking him in with his stuffed dinosaur. When she was ready to leave, Nayeli told me she was satisfied with what she saw. She reminded me that these unannounced checks would continue for the foreseeable future, but that so far I was doing everything right in terms of providing stability and safety for Theo. After she left, I sat in the living room trying to decompress from the longest day of my life. I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke up to Theo screaming. It was 1:30 a.m. I ran to his room and found him sitting up in bed, tangled in his sheets, his face wet with tears. He was saying something about cement bags and not being fast enough. I sat on the edge of his bed and turned on his lamp, keeping my voice calm as I told him he was home and safe. It took almost 20 minutes to get him settled down enough to try sleeping again. I left his door open and the hallway light on. At 4:15 a.m., he woke up screaming again. This time it was because he heard a truck engine outside our apartment building, probably an early morning delivery. He was convinced Uncle Mike had come to take him back to the construction site. I ended up pulling a chair into his room and sitting there for the rest of the night, dozing in and out while Theo finally fell into a deeper sleep around 5 a.m. By the time morning came, we were both exhausted, but I could see he felt more secure being home than he had in weeks. I made him breakfast and we got ready for the appointment at the Child Advocacy Center. The building was designed to look friendly and non-threatening, with bright colors and toys in the waiting area. A woman with kind eyes introduced herself as the interviewer and explained to Theo that she just wanted to hear his story about what happened. She told him there were no wrong answers and he could take breaks whenever he needed. Then she took him back to a private room while I sat in the lobby, trying not to imagine what he was having to describe in detail. The minutes crawled by. I picked up a magazine but couldn't focus on any of the words. After what felt like forever but was actually 45 minutes, the interviewer brought Theo back out. He looked tired but also relieved, like telling his full story had lifted some weight off his shoulders. Detective Price came out of an observation room and walked over to us. He told me the interview went well and that Theo was very brave. Then he introduced me to a woman in a business suit who he said was Assistant District Attorney Roxana Noel. She shook my hand and asked if we could talk privately for a few minutes. I told Theo to wait in the lobby and play with the building blocks while I followed them into a small conference room. Roxana explained that based on Theo's interview and all the evidence collected so far, they were looking at serious charges. Uncle Mike would face child labor violations and child endangerment. Maya and Derek would be charged with conspiracy, contributing to the delinquency of a minor and potentially forgery. She warned me that plea negotiations would likely happen and asked how I felt about the possibility of reduced charges in exchange for cooperation and restitution. I told her I wanted them punished, but I also wanted this over with quickly for Theo's sake. She nodded and said she understood. Later that afternoon, my phone rang while Theo and I were eating lunch. It was Detective Price again. He told me that OSHA and state labor investigators had descended on Uncle Mike's construction company that morning for a full audit of all workers, safety protocols, and employment records. They'd identified at least 3 other workers who appeared to be minors based on the records, which meant Uncle Mike's legal problems just multiplied big time. The construction company had been ordered to cease all operations until the investigation was complete. Detective Price sounded satisfied as he explained this meant more resources would be dedicated to the prosecution. He called back an hour later with more news. They'd subpoenaed bank records for Maya, Derek, and Uncle Mike to trace the money flow from Theo's labor. Early results showed regular transfers from Uncle Mike to Maya, labeled as family support, totaling over $5,000 in the past 3 weeks. This financial evidence proved that Maya wasn't just allowing the exploitation, she was directly profiting from it in a way that would be hard for her to explain away in court. I felt sick hearing the actual dollar amounts, knowing my son had been reduced to a source of income for his own mother. 2 days later, I got a call from someone at the school district. They'd sent a forensic document examiner to analyze the forged permission slips. The examiner compared them to my actual signature on file and checked printer identification codes. The results confirmed that the signatures were forgeries and that the documents were printed from a printer located in Derek's apartment complex office. Security footage even showed Derek accessing that office on dates that matched when several of the forms were created. This evidence directly tied Derek to the forgery scheme and showed it was planned out, not just a spontaneous bad decision. The next morning, Nayeli called my cell. She told me that CPS was scheduling an emergency custody hearing in family court for next week. A judge would review all the evidence and determine temporary custody arrangements while the criminal case worked its way through the system. She explained that I needed to bring all my documentation showing my stable home environment, my cooperation with authorities, and proof that Theo was doing well in my care. Nayeli assured me that based on everything she'd observed, she would be recommending that Theo remain in my custody with supervised visitation only for Maya if she complied with certain conditions. I thanked her and started gathering every piece of paper I could find. Pay stubs, lease agreement, character references, Theo's old report cards. That afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and asked me to sit down. He said he was sympathetic to what I was going through, but he had to point out that I'd used all my personal days and was now cutting into unpaid leave. If it continued much longer, it could affect my job security. I explained the situation in general terms without going into all the details. He listened and said he would work with me, but I could hear the concern in his voice. The conversation made me realize how bad my financial situation was becoming. Legal fees were piling up even though I hadn't officially hired a lawyer yet. Lost work time meant smaller paychecks, and I still had rent, utilities, food, and now therapy costs for Theo to worry about. I walked out of his office feeling the weight of everything crushing down on me. I got in my car and drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the route. When I pulled into my apartment parking lot, the sun was already setting. I grabbed my phone and work bag, trudged up the stairs to our second-floor unit and unlocked the door. Theo was at the kitchen table doing homework, and I forced myself to smile at him, even though everything felt like it was falling apart. I heated up leftover pasta for both of us, and we ate mostly in silence. After dinner, I helped Theo with his math worksheet, then sent him to take a shower and get ready for bed. Once he was in his room, I opened my laptop to check if there were any updates from Nayeli or Detective Price. That's when I saw it. An email from an address I didn't recognize, subject line RE Custody Matter, Hester V. Watkins. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The email was from Maya's attorney, and it was 3 pages of legal language that made my head spin. The main points were clear, though. They were threatening to file a countersuit claiming I had kidnapped Theo from the construction site without proper authority. They said I was alienating Theo from his mother and coaching him to make false statements against her. The email suggested that my actions could be seen as parental interference and that a judge might view me as the one creating an unsafe environment. It went on to say that if I continued pursuing criminal charges and didn't agree to joint custody, they would present evidence that I was manipulating the situation for custody advantage. The whole thing was designed to scare me, and it was working. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely control the mouse. I read through it twice, feeling my anger build with each paragraph. They were trying to make me look like the bad guy when Maya was the one who had my son working construction for 3 weeks. I immediately forwarded the email to Detective Price with a short message saying, "I just received this and didn't know what to do." Then I forwarded it to Nayeli with the same message. My phone rang less than 10 minutes later. It was Nayeli. She told me she'd just read the email and wanted me to know that this was actually good news for our case. I asked her how threatening legal action against me could possibly be good news. She explained that desperate attorneys send emails like this when they know their client's position is weak. The fact that Maya's lawyer was resorting to intimidation tactics showed that CPS wasn't falling for any of their excuses. Nayeli said the kidnapping claim was ridiculous because I'm Theo's legal parent and I removed him from immediate danger. She reminded me that law enforcement was already involved by the time I got to that construction site. As for the coaching allegations, she said Theo's statement at the advocacy center was recorded by trained professionals who know how to spot coach testimony. Nayeli explained that supervised visitation was still possible if Maya completed certain requirements. She would need to finish parenting classes, go to counseling, and show that she understood why forcing Theo to work construction was harmful. Nayeli emphasized that family reunification is always the goal when it can be done safely, but safety has to come first. She told me not to respond to the attorney's email and to forward any future communications directly to her and Detective Price. I thanked her and felt slightly better after hanging up. The next morning, I called around looking for a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. The third place I tried connected me with Sophia Bailey, who had experience working with kids who'd been through exploitation and abuse. I scheduled an intake appointment for that afternoon. When I picked Theo up from the school, I told him we were going to meet with someone who helps kids process difficult experiences. He asked if he was in trouble, and I assured him he wasn't, that this was just someone who could help him feel better about everything that happened. Sophia's office was in a small building near the library. She met us in the waiting room and introduced herself to both of us. She had Theo come back to her office first for an initial meeting while I stayed in the lobby. They were back there for about 40 minutes. When they came out, Theo looked tired but not upset. Sophia asked if I could stay for a few minutes to talk. She sat down across from me in her office and pulled out a notepad. She explained that Theo was showing signs of trauma from what he'd experienced. I should expect nightmares, anxiety, difficulty trusting adults, possible regression in behavior and challenges with authority figures. She said all of this was normal and didn't mean Theo was permanently damaged. Sophia gave me a handout with strategies for creating safety and predictability at home. Things like consistent routines, clear communication, letting Theo have some control over small decisions, and avoiding surprises when possible. She scheduled twice-weekly sessions for Theo starting the following week. I asked how long therapy might take, and she said it varied by child, but we should plan on at least several months of regular sessions. That evening, while Theo was watching TV, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman identified herself as a reporter from the local news station. She said she'd heard about a child labor case involving the school district and wanted to interview me about school safety failures and exploitation of minors. I felt panic rise in my chest. I told her I had no comment and hung up. Then I immediately called Detective Price. I asked if there was any way to keep Theo's name out of the media coverage. He said he would work with the prosecutor's office to request that any reporting avoid identifying details about the minor victim. But he warned me that high-profile cases sometimes attract attention despite everyone's best efforts. He suggested I not answer calls from unknown numbers for a while. 2 days later, I got a call from someone named Hassan Cartwright, who worked in the school district's security office. He said he was heading up a review of student safety protocols and wanted my input as a parent who experienced the system's failures firsthand. I was still angry at the school, but I agreed to meet with him because maybe I could help prevent this from happening to another kid. We met at a coffee shop near the school. Hassan brought a tablet and took notes while I walked him through every gap I'd identified. The outdated contact information that prevented them from reaching me. The fact that permission slips weren't verified directly with parents. The emergency exit doors that didn't trigger any alerts when Theo left through them. The lack of automated notifications when a student scanned in but didn't show up to class. Hassan listened carefully and asked detailed questions about each point. He seemed genuinely committed to fixing the problems rather than just covering for the district. He showed me some of the new protocols they were developing and asked for my feedback. By the end of the meeting, I felt like something positive might actually come from this nightmare. A few days after that, Detective Price called with what he called good news. The phone metadata from Uncle Mike's text to Theo had been fully authenticated by their forensic team. The analysis proved the messages came from Uncle Mike's actual phone, were sent during school hours on multiple days, and contained clear threats that met the legal definition of coercing a minor. He said this evidence made the criminal case much stronger because Uncle Mike couldn't claim someone else sent the messages or that they were taken out of context. The detective explained that having documented threats tied directly to Uncle Mike's phone made it nearly impossible for him to argue this was all just a misunderstanding or a family business arrangement. Meanwhile, Theo was continuing his therapy sessions with Sophia. After his third session, Sophia called me in for a brief update. She said Theo had disclosed some new information that she was required to report. Theo told her that Derek had specifically coached him on what to say if teachers asked about his tiredness or the marks on his body. Derek had told him to say he was helping his stepdad with projects at home and that he was just tired from staying up late playing video games. Sophia filed a mandatory reporter statement about this new information, which she said would add another layer to the conspiracy charges against Derek. Theo had also admitted to Sophia that he started drinking those energy drinks because he was so exhausted he could barely stand up by afternoon. Derek told him it was normal for construction workers to use them to stay alert. Sophia was concerned about the caffeine exposure and asked if I'd noticed any changes in Theo's sleep patterns or behavior during those 3 weeks. I told her he'd been more irritable and had trouble falling asleep, but I'd attributed it to preteen hormones. A few days later, I got a weird message through a mutual friend of Maya's and mine. The friend said Derek wanted me to know that we should work this out between ourselves like adults, instead of letting lawyers and courts destroy both our families. The message implied that if I dropped the criminal charges and agreed to joint custody, they would make sure Uncle Mike paid for Theo's therapy, and we could all move forward without more legal drama. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me was tempted by the idea of avoiding months of court battles and legal fees, but then I remembered Nayeli's warnings about manipulation tactics. I remembered Theo's face when I found him at that construction site. I remembered those threatening texts on his phone. I didn't respond to the message. Instead, I forwarded it to Nayeli the next morning. She called me within an hour. She said I did exactly the right thing by not responding and by documenting the contact attempt. She explained that all communication had to go through official supervised channels from now on, and that any attempts at direct contact needed to be reported immediately. Nayeli said these kinds of messages are often attempts to get victims to drop charges or make statements that can be used against them later in court. She told me that Derek's message actually helped our case because it showed consciousness of guilt. If they really believed they'd done nothing wrong, they wouldn't be trying to negotiate dropping charges. Her guidance helped me stay focused on protecting Theo, rather than taking what seemed like an easy way out. About a week after that, Roxana Knoll called me. She said Uncle Mike's attorney had contacted her office with a settlement offer. Uncle Mike would pay $15,000 into a trust for Theo's future expenses and plead to reduce charges if we agreed not to pursue any civil damages. Roxana warned me that accepting a civil settlement now could hurt the criminal case by making it look like I was more interested in money than justice. She said prosecutors prefer when victims wait until after criminal proceedings are complete before considering civil claims. That way, defense attorneys can't argue that the victim is just trying to get paid. Roxana advised me to reject the offer and wait. She said based on the evidence they had, Uncle Mike was likely going to face serious consequences regardless of any settlement, and we would be in a better position to pursue civil damages after the criminal case concluded. A few days later, Detective Price called with an update on the labor investigation. The state investigators had gone through all of Uncle Mike's employment records and timesheets for the past 6 months. They found documentation showing at least 2 other kids who appeared to be minors working on various job sites. One was a 14-year-old who worked weekends for about 2 months. The other was a 13-year-old who put in shifts during summer break. Neither situation was as bad as what happened to Theo, but the pattern was there in black and white. Detective Price explained that this evidence would make it much harder for Uncle Mike to argue that Theo's situation was just a one-time mistake or family misunderstanding. The prosecutor's office was now treating this as a bigger case with more resources being assigned to it. That was good news for building a strong case, but Detective Price warned me it also meant the legal process would take longer. More defendants, more charges, more evidence to process. I hung up feeling both relieved that the case was solid and frustrated that justice was going to take months instead of weeks. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Maya and how she could have done this to our son. The anger built up inside me until I grabbed my phone and called her number. It went to voicemail. I didn't hang up. Instead, I left a message telling her exactly what I thought of her as a mother. I said she was selfish and cruel and that I would make sure she never got unsupervised time with Theo again. I told her she didn't deserve to be called a parent after what she put him through. The words just poured out of me, all the rage and hurt from the past few weeks. When I finally stopped talking and hung up, I felt hollow instead of better. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Nayeli from CPS. Her voice was calm but serious. She said Maya's attorney had already forwarded my voicemail recording to her office and filed a motion with the court. The motion claimed I was violating the no-contact order and trying to turn Theo against his mother. Nayeli asked me to tell her exactly what happened. My stomach dropped as I realized what I had done. I confessed everything before she could hear it from someone else. I told her about the anger and exhaustion and how I just lost control for a few minutes. Nayeli listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a long breath. She said she was disappointed but not really surprised. She explained that parents in these high-stress situations often make impulsive choices that end up hurting their own cases. The good news was that I had reported it myself before she heard it from the other side. That honesty would be documented and would help, but she warned me in very clear terms that I needed to be perfect from now on. Every single mistake would be used against me by Maya's attorney. No more phone calls, no more messages, no contact at all except through official channels. I promised I would follow the rules exactly. After we hung up, I sat there feeling like an idiot. I had just handed Maya's lawyer ammunition to use against me. The next morning, I called a family law attorney that a coworker had recommended. I explained the situation and asked for advice on how to handle communication and documentation going forward. The attorney spent an hour coaching me on proper tone, what to document and how, and strategies for avoiding giving the other side anything they could twist against me. It cost me $200 I didn't really have, but I left feeling more prepared. A week later, the school district held an evening meeting about their new safety protocols. Hassan Cartwright from the district security office presented the changes they were putting in place. The new system included biometric check-in verification, so kids couldn't just scan someone else's badge. Parents would get automated text alerts anytime their child was marked absent or left school early. Every emergency exit would be connected to alarms that triggered immediate staff response. The district was also requiring quarterly contact information verification with actual penalties for schools that didn't keep current records. Hassan went through each protocol in detail, explaining how it would work and what problems it was designed to prevent. Then he did something unexpected. He asked me directly to review the protocols and give feedback from a parent's perspective. I was impressed by how thorough everything was. More than that, I appreciated being included in the solution, instead of just being treated like a victim of the system's failure. I gave him several suggestions about parent notification timing and backup contact methods. Hassan took notes on everything I said and promised to incorporate the feedback. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like my anger at the school was finally turning into something useful. That same week, Sophia Bailey asked to meet with me separately from Theo's regular therapy sessions. She wanted to educate me about trauma responses and what to expect in the coming months. We sat in her office while she explained that Theo's nightmares and anxiety were completely normal reactions to what he had been through. She said recovery wouldn't be a straight line. He would have good days and then sudden setbacks. There might be triggers we didn't expect, like certain sounds or smells that reminded him of the construction site. Sophia taught me specific grounding techniques to use when Theo started to panic. She showed me how to help him focus on his breathing and identify things he could see, hear, and touch in the present moment. She emphasized the importance of maintaining consistent routines at home because predictability creates a sense of safety. Then she went over warning signs that would indicate Theo needed additional support, like withdrawal from activities he used to enjoy or talk about hurting himself. Her calm expertise made me feel less helpless. For the first time since this started, I had actual tools to help my son instead of just watching him struggle. A few days after that, Detective Price called with news about the forensic analysis of those forged permission slips. The document examiners had finished their work. The printer identification codes embedded in the documents matched a specific printer in the business office at Derek's apartment complex. Even better, the apartment complex had security footage of the office area. The footage showed Derek going into that office on 3 separate dates that lined up exactly with when several of the permission slips were created. This physical evidence directly connected Derek to the forgery scheme. It proved that this wasn't just Maya's idea or something that happened without planning. Derek had actively participated in creating fake documents with my signature. Detective Price said this evidence made Derek's legal position much worse. His attorney had been trying to paint him as someone who just went along with his girlfriend's bad judgment, but now there was proof he had taken specific actions to deceive the school. The bank records analysis came back around the same time. Investigators had traced every dollar that moved between Uncle Mike, Maya, and Derek. The records showed that Maya received over $5,000 from Uncle Mike during the 3 weeks Theo worked. Every single transfer happened within a day or two of Theo working a shift. But here's what really stood out. Maya didn't keep any of that money. She immediately transferred it to her attorney's retainer account or used it to pay rent she owed on her apartment. Detective Price explained that this showed financial desperation was a major reason behind her choices. She was facing eviction and couldn't afford her custody lawyer without that money. Understanding her financial situation made me see her actions differently. Not as pure evil, but as desperation mixed with manipulation and terrible judgment. I was still furious about what she put Theo through, but now I could see the whole picture of how she got there. That didn't excuse anything, but it made it more complicated than just calling her a monster. Detective Price called again a few days later with a warning. Uncle Mike had been making angry statements to his neighbors about me. He was telling people I had ruined his business and cost him everything. Detective Price recommended I stay alert for any potential retaliation. He told me to document any suspicious activity around my home or workplace, vary my daily routine slightly, and report any contact attempts immediately. Nayeli updated our safety plan to include these precautions. She also contacted Theo's school directly to make absolutely sure they understood that only I was authorized to pick him up. No exceptions, no matter what story anyone told. About 5 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site, Maya's attorney filed a formal request with CPS for a supervised visitation session. The request argued that maintaining the mother-child relationship was important even while the criminal case moved forward. Nayeli called to discuss it with me. She explained that supervised visits at a CPS facility could actually be good for Theo if handled the right way. It would let him see that his mother was okay while keeping clear safety boundaries in place. A trained supervisor would be in the room the whole time. I could be in the building, but not in the same room. Nayeli thought it might help Theo process some of his conflicted feelings about his mom. I didn't want to agree. Part of me wanted to keep Maya away from Theo completely, but Nayeli pointed out that courts almost always allow some kind of supervised contact unless there's immediate physical danger. Fighting it now might make me look unreasonable later. I finally agreed to one trial visit for 1 hour with a CPS supervisor present. The visit happened on a Tuesday afternoon at a CPS family visitation room. The room was set up to look friendly with toys and comfortable chairs, but there were cameras in every corner. Nayeli was the supervisor. She sat in a chair near the door with a clipboard. Maya arrived right on time. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She hugged Theo as soon as she saw him. Theo stood stiff in her arms, not really hugging back. Maya told him she loved him and that she had made bad choices. She said she was sorry for what happened. But when Nayeli asked her to specifically explain what she did wrong, Maya's answer was all about financial pressure and how Derek had influenced her decisions. She talked about being desperate and scared of losing her apartment. She never quite said the words that she had put Theo in danger or exploited him for money. Theo sat quietly on the couch the whole time. He answered questions with 1 or 2 words. He didn't smile. He didn't relax. When the hour was up, he practically ran to me in the waiting room. In the car on the way home, I asked him how he felt about the visit. He said he didn't want to do it again right now. Maybe later, but not now. I told him that was completely okay, and that he got to have a say in how often he saw his mom. Nayeli wrote up her observation report that night. She noted that Maya showed concern for Theo and expressed regret, but hadn't yet taken full accountability for her specific actions. She wrote that Theo was uncomfortable throughout the visit and clearly wasn't ready for regular contact yet. The report recommended continuing with supervised visits, but not increasing the frequency until Theo showed more willingness and Maya demonstrated better understanding of the harm she caused. 2 days after that visit, Roxana called me at work. She said plea negotiations were starting for all 3 defendants. Uncle Mike's attorney was willing to have him plead to child labor violations and pay big fines and money to make up for what he did in exchange for avoiding jail time. Derek's attorney was pushing for a deal with probation, counseling, and paying money back, but no felony on his record. Maya's attorney was arguing for a suspended sentence with parenting classes and getting supervised visits back. Roxana asked what outcomes would feel like justice to me while being realistic about what courts usually order. I told her I wanted them to face real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. But I also knew courts don't always give harsh sentences to first-time offenders who plead guilty. Roxana said she would push for the strongest terms possible while being practical about what a judge would actually approve. 3 days later, the emergency custody hearing started in family court. Both sides had their attorneys and evidence ready. I sat at a table with my attorney while Maya sat across the room with hers. The judge asked me to testify first about what happened. I walked up to the witness stand and put my hand on the Bible. Then I told the judge everything about discovering Theo at the construction site that morning. I described the angry red marks on his shoulders and the energy drinks in his pocket. I explained how I immediately took him to urgent care and cooperated with police and CPS. I talked about the threatening texts on Theo's phone from Uncle Mike. My attorney showed the judge copies of my stable employment records, my apartment lease showing suitable housing, and Theo's perfect school attendance from before all this happened. She presented documentation of every CPS visit and my full cooperation with their investigation. I felt nervous the whole time, but I kept my answers clear and direct. After I finished, Nayeli took the stand. She testified about her home visits to my apartment and her assessment that Theo was doing well in my care. She described seeing our normal routines, checking that Theo had his own bedroom and adequate food, and observing how I helped him with homework and bedtime. Nayeli told the judge about the emergency safety plan she created and how I followed every requirement without complaint. She noted the unannounced visits she made and how the home environment stayed consistently safe and stable. Her testimony was professional and detailed. She had notes from every visit and specific examples of Theo's well-being. Then Maya's attorney stood up and started arguing her side. He said Maya was trying to teach Theo work ethic in a family business context. He claimed her financial hardship led to poor judgment rather than mean intentions. The attorney talked about how Maya had completed intake for parenting classes and started counseling. He requested shared custody with a slow transition back to Maya having more time with Theo. He emphasized that Maya loved her son and made mistakes under pressure. I had to sit there quietly while Maya's attorney made it sound like I was overreacting and using this incident to gain custody advantage. He suggested I was keeping Theo away from his mother unfairly. My hands gripped the edge of the table. My attorney leaned over and whispered that the judge would see through the spin. She told me to stay calm and let the evidence speak. When it was time for CPS testimony again, Nayeli returned to the stand. This part felt really important. She stated clearly that Theo had been subjected to dangerous working conditions at a construction site. She described how he was threatened to keep the secret and showed signs of trauma from the whole experience. Nayeli explained the nightmares, the anxiety, and the panic he felt. She recommended that I keep sole physical custody of Theo. She said supervised visitation for Maya should only happen if Maya completed parenting classes and individual counseling about her judgment and boundaries. Nayeli emphasized that Maya needed to show real understanding of child safety before getting more access to Theo. Her testimony was balanced but firm. She wasn't trying to punish Maya forever, but she made it clear that Theo's safety had to come first. The school district submitted a written report to the court. Hassan took the stand to talk about it. He acknowledged that the school had process failures that let Theo get removed from campus repeatedly without proper parent notification. Hassan testified about the new protocols being put in place. He described the biometric check-in system, the emergency exit alarms, and the automated parent alerts. He took responsibility for the gaps that helped this situation happen. Hassan was honest that the school should have caught this sooner. While this didn't excuse what Maya and Derek did, it showed the judge that multiple system failures occurred and people were working to fix them. Sophia provided a written assessment about Theo's trauma symptoms and treatment needs. The judge read through her letter carefully. Sophia's report outlined that Theo was experiencing anxiety, nightmares, and trust issues that matched what happens to kids who get coerced and exploited. She wrote that his recovery needed stability, consistent routines, and continued therapy twice a week. Sophia recommended against any custody changes during his acute treatment phase. She suggested that visitation with Maya should be slow and based on Theo's comfort level. The judge asked a few questions about the assessment, and Sophia answered them clearly. She explained that forcing contact before Theo was ready could make his trauma worse. After all the testimony and evidence, the judge took a 15-minute break to review everything. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. I sat there trying not to think about what would happen if the judge gave Maya shared custody. When the judge came back, everyone stood up. The judge issued a ruling granting me temporary sole physical custody of Theo. Legal custody would stay shared for now, meaning we both still had say in major decisions. But Theo would live with me full-time. Maya got supervised visitation 2 hours per week at a CPS facility. The visits depended on her enrolling in and actually attending parenting classes and individual counseling. The judge ordered a review hearing in 3 months to check on progress and think about expanding visitation. I felt relieved, but I also knew this was just temporary. The permanent custody decision would come later after seeing how everything went. On the criminal side, things moved faster. Derek and Uncle Mike got arrested and formally charged based on all the evidence. Derek faced charges of conspiracy to commit child labor violations, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, forgery, and child endangerment. Uncle Mike faced multiple counts of child labor violations, child endangerment, and coercion. The police took them both in for booking and processing. They each got released on bond with strict conditions. The conditions included no contact with Theo or me at all. No phone calls, no messages, no showing up anywhere near us. Detective Price called to tell me about the arrests and said both men looked pretty shaken up when they realized how serious this was. Over the next 2 weeks, the plea negotiations got more intense. All 3 defendants started to understand they were facing trial with really strong evidence against them. Uncle Mike's attorney worked out a deal first. Uncle Mike agreed to plead no contest to child labor violations and child endangerment. His sentence was 2 years probation, $25,000 in fines and money to pay back that would get split among the minor victims, mandatory labor law training, and a ban from supervising any workers under 18 ever again. Derek's plea deal came next. He accepted 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and a permanent ban from any childcare or supervision roles with kids. Roxana called to update me on both deals. She said these were reasonable outcomes given that both men had no prior criminal records and were pleading guilty. After I heard about the plea deals, Nayeli called with a recommendation. She said I should enroll in a parenting class focused on co-parenting after trauma. She explained that even though I didn't cause any of this, learning strategies for supporting Theo while managing my own anger at Maya would make my position stronger in court. At first, I felt resistant. It seemed like I was blamed for something I didn't do. But Nayeli helped me understand that showing willingness to improve my parenting skills could only help my case. Courts like to see parents who are open to learning and growing. I signed up for an 8-week course that met on Wednesday evenings at a community center. The class was called Co-Parenting Through Crisis, and it covered things like keeping kids out of adult conflicts, managing your emotions around your ex, and creating stability after trauma. 3 weeks after the initial incident, the school district rolled out Hassan's new security system across every building. I got an email explaining how it worked. Every student now scanned their fingerprint when they entered the building, not just an ID badge. The emergency exit doors got connected to an alarm system that sent instant alerts to the main office and security staff if anyone pushed through them. Parents got automatic text messages anytime their kid left school early or was marked absent from class. The district also made a new rule that schools had to verify parent contact information every 3 months, and any school that didn't follow the rule would get penalized. Hassan called me a few days after the rollout and asked if I would come speak at a district training session about why these changes mattered from a parent's point of view. I agreed to do it because talking about what happened to Theo might help other families avoid the same nightmare. Theo kept going to therapy with Sophia twice every week. The progress happened slowly, but I could see small improvements over time. He went back to his regular classes without having panic attacks in the hallway or classroom. The loud sounds still bothered him, though. Anytime he heard construction equipment or heavy machinery outside, he would freeze up and his breathing would get fast. Some nights he still couldn't sleep and would come into my room saying he had bad dreams about the construction site, but Sophia pointed out the good things that were happening too. Theo raised his hand in math class to help another kid who was confused about fractions. He joined the after-school dinosaur club that he used to love before all this happened. Sophia told me that recovery doesn't happen in a straight line. Some days would be better than others, and that was completely normal for what Theo went through. Maya finished 4 weeks of her court-ordered parenting class and started going to individual counseling like the judge required. Her supervised visits with Theo kept happening every week at the CPS facility. Nayeli told me that Maya seemed different in the recent sessions. She was taking more responsibility for what happened, instead of making excuses or blaming other people for her choices. Theo still acted uncomfortable during the visits, but he was starting to warm up to his mom a little bit. He would answer her questions about school, and sometimes even smile at something she said. I had mixed feelings about Maya being more involved in Theo's life again. Part of me was still furious about what she did and wanted to keep her away from him forever. But I knew I had to focus on what was actually best for Theo, not on my anger. If having a relationship with his mom was good for him, I needed to support that even if it was hard for me. Uncle Mike's construction company had to deal with a separate civil case that state labor regulators brought against them. The company decided to plead no contest to multiple labor violations instead of fighting it in court. They got hit with a $75,000 fine and had to operate under government monitoring for 2 years. The company also had to create and follow strict age verification and safety rules for every single worker they hired. Uncle Mike managed to keep his business running, but barely. The other families whose kids worked there were filing their own lawsuits to get money for damages. I thought about doing the same thing, but Roxana told me to wait until after the criminal case was completely finished. The 3-month review hearing happened in family court, with both sides presenting updates. The judge looked through compliance reports from CPS, therapy progress notes from Sophia, and paperwork showing that Maya completed her parenting classes and was going to counseling. The judge decided to extend my sole physical custody of Theo for another 3 months. But the judge also said Maya could increase her supervised visits from 2 hours per week to 4 hours per week because Theo seemed more comfortable with her now. Maya's attorney stood up and asked the judge to allow unsupervised visitation. The judge said no and explained that more progress needed to happen first. The judge also wanted to hear what Theo thought about spending unsupervised time with his mom before making that decision. Theo and I started building new routines at home that made both of us feel safer. Every day after school, we did homework together at the kitchen table where I could see him and help if he needed it. I put a list on the refrigerator with names and numbers of people who were not allowed to contact Theo under any circumstances. We came up with a safety word that Theo could use if he ever felt uncomfortable or unsafe, even if he was with someone he knew. We practiced different scenarios, like what to do if someone tried to pick him up from the school without permission, or if anyone contacted him in a way that felt wrong. Going through these practice situations helped Theo feel more in control. He knew exactly what steps to take if something bad happened again. The routines also helped me worry less because I knew Theo had concrete tools to protect himself. Derek and Uncle Mike went to court 7 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site and formally accepted their plea deals. Derek got 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling sessions, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from any job that involved supervising children. Uncle Mike got 2 years of probation, big fines that I didn't know the exact amount of, mandatory training about following labor laws, and a rule that he could never employ anyone under 18 years old. Both of them had to pay parts of Theo's therapy costs as payback for what they did. The sentences felt too light to me. I wanted them to face harder consequences for hurting my son. But Roxana explained that first-time offenders who plead guilty usually get deals like this instead of jail time. At least they had criminal records now and couldn't do this to another kid. Hassan reached out again and invited me to join the district's school safety advisory committee. The committee had parents, school administrators, and security staff who all worked together on making student protection better. I said yes to joining because I found that putting my anger into preventing future problems helped me deal with what happened. Theo's teacher also started coordinating with me about ways to support Theo in class without making it obvious to the other kids. She gave him extra time on assignments when he was having a rough day and let him take breaks if he needed to step out of the classroom for a minute. On a quiet Tuesday evening, 7 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site, we sat at the kitchen table working on a model dinosaur together. Theo had picked it out using reward points he earned in therapy for making progress. He talked about his day at the school and told me about a funny thing that happened at lunch. Then he looked up from the tiny plastic bones he was connecting and asked if we could go to the Natural History Museum on the weekend. I said yes, and watched him carefully fit the pieces together with his small hands. Life wasn't fixed and probably never would be completely. Theo still woke up with nightmares sometimes. I still felt anxious whenever he was out of my sight for too long. We still had therapy appointments and legal meetings on the calendar. But right now, in this exact moment, Theo was safe and healing and home where he belonged. The school systems that failed us were getting better. The people who hurt him were facing real consequences. We were building a new normal that felt more secure than before. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one, and that was enough. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Nothing fancy, just life being weird again. Thanks for hanging out. It always feels like chatting with an old friend. We'll do it again soon. I was walking down the street when these two girls I've never seen before called my name and said, "Ryan, this is super weird, but our best friend's baby shower is happening right now. Can you please pretend to be her boyfriend and the father?" They looked so desperate and explained her ex was insane, had tried to burn their house down while she was inside, and was coming at 3 p.m. to reclaim what's his. So against every logical thought, I followed them into this house covered in pink balloons and baby girl banners. I was walking down the street when these two girls I've never seen before called my name. "Ryan, this is super weird, but our best friend's baby shower is happening right now. Can you please pretend to be her boyfriend and the father?" I did a double take. They looked so desperate. Her ex is insane. He's tried to burn their house down while she was in. He's going to show up at some point, and we need someone who can scare him off. I'm 6 feet 4 inches and apparently look like I eat nails for breakfast, so I get why they picked me. But this was insane. "How do you even know my name?" "Your gym bag," one said, pointing at the tag. "Please." He said he's coming at 3 p.m. to reclaim what's his. It's 2:15. Against every logical thought, I followed them into this house covered in pink balloons and baby girl banners. The living room was packed with women who all turned to stare at me. Then I saw her. Becky from my comparative lit class sophomore year. The girl I'd spent an entire semester trying to work up the courage to talk to. Now 8 months pregnant, looking exhausted. It seemed like the worst joke the universe has ever played. "Everyone, this is Ryan," the girls announced. "The father." Becky's eyes went wide, recognizing me, but she played along. "Hey babe," she said weakly. Her friend pulled me aside. "Richard's been sending videos all morning. He's unhinged. Just stand there and look protective until he shows up and leaves." I stood by Becky's chair while she opened presents. The party tried to feel normal, but everyone was tense. Her phone buzzed. She showed me a video from Richard. "On my way to get what's mine. Hope you didn't think you could replace me. This is the 6th one today," Becky whispered. An older woman, maybe an aunt, said quietly to another guest, "Remember when Richard threw that bottle at her head at Christmas?" Becky's mom approached me. "Thank you for doing this. Last time he showed up somewhere, he broke her friend's nose for interfering." Another video came through at 2:30. Richard in his truck. "Tell everyone to clear out unless they want problems." The room got quieter. People kept glancing at the windows. At 2:40, another text. "Nice pink decorations. Almost there." A friend mentioned, "He knows which house. He's probably driving by." Becky tried to focus on opening a baby onesie, but her hands were shaking. "Last time he came to a party," someone whispered. 4 people went to the ER. At 2:50, Becky's phone rang. She put it on speaker by accident. Richard's voice filled the room. "I see you have people over. That's cute." 10 minutes. The entire party shifted away from the front of the house. Women were grabbing their kids, moving them to back rooms. "Should we call the police now?" Becky's mom asked. "They won't come until something happens," someone responded. "We tried before." At 2:55, a text with a photo of the house from outside. "I counted about 20 cars. Hope your new man is ready." Becky stood behind me instinctively. The room was silent except for some kid's cartoon playing in the background. 3 p.m. exactly. A truck engine revving outside, music blasting then cutting off. Heavy footsteps on the porch. The door didn't knock. It just opened. Richard walked in like he owned the place. 6 feet 2 inches. Neck tattoos. Wearing a tank top that showed military ink covering his arms. His eyes scanned the room until they found me. "So, you're the replacement." His voice was calm, which was somehow worse. "I'm here for Becky. You need to leave." He laughed. "They hired security? That's adorable." "I'm not security. I'm the father." His whole demeanor changed. Face went from amused to deadly. "The F you just say?" Becky stepped slightly out from behind me. "You heard him, Richard. That's my kid, Becky. 4 years together." "No, Richard. We broke up 10 months ago." "Do the math." He took a step forward, but I blocked his path. "This is a family event," I said. "You're not family." "Family?" He looked around the room. "These people watched me and her for years. Tell him. Tell him whose baby that is." Becky's mom's voice was steel. "Someone who isn't welcome in my home." Richard's face went red. "You old bitch." I stepped directly in front of him. "Watch your mouth." He looked up at me, really seeing the size difference for the first time. "You think being tall means crap? I've killed bigger men than you overseas, and I'm supposed to be impressed?" "Richard," Becky said, voice stronger now. "You got the DNA test results. You know it's not yours. Those tests can be faked. Then take another one," I said. "Through the court. But today, you leave." He looked around. 20 phones pointed at him. One of Becky's friend holding the golf club. Me blocking his path to Becky. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door. "Not even close." He pointed at me. "I'll find out everything about you. Good luck with that." He slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Everyone started breathing again. Becky collapsed into a chair. "Thank you," she whispered to me. "You don't know what you just did." Her mom was crying with relief. "He actually left. He never just leaves." We tried to resume the party, but everyone was still shaken. Becky opened a few more gifts half-heartedly. About 20 minutes minutes later, I walked Becky to my car to grab something. We found all 4 tires slashed. Oh my god, Becky gasped. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Richard with a photo of my license plate. Ryan, Berkeley graduate, 3712 Pine Avenue, apartment 6C. See you soon, hero. My blood went cold. He had my address. I stood there staring at my phone screen, reading Richard's text over and over. He had my full address, my apartment number, everything. Becky was still next to me, looking at my slashed tires, and I could feel her shaking. Ryan, I'm so sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. Before I could respond, women from the baby shower started coming out of the house. They gathered in the driveway, forming a protective circle around us. Blake pushed through the group, her phone already pressed to her ear. Yes, we need an officer at 4782 Maple Street, she was saying. There's been property damage and threats. I kept looking at my tires, 4 neat slashes in each one. Richard had taken his time, made sure I couldn't drive anywhere. The women around us were talking all at once, voices overlapping with worry and anger. 15 minutes later, a police officer pulled up. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and looked tired already. She took photos of my tires, wrote down what happened, but I could tell from her face this wasn't going to go anywhere. So he threatened you via text message and damaged your property, she said, reviewing her notes. But you didn't actually see him slash the tires? Who else would it be? Lauren asked. He literally just left after threatening everyone. The officer sighed. Without proof it was him specifically, and without direct physical harm, there's not much we can do. The threats would need to be more specific. Saying see you soon isn't technically a threat of violence. Everyone started talking at once. Someone mentioned the Christmas incident. Another person brought up the broken nose. The officer just kept shaking her head. Has he actually hurt someone today? Right now? She asked. He has to hurt someone first? Blake's voice was sharp. That's what you're telling us? I'm sorry. That's how the law works. You can file for a restraining order. We tried that, Becky said quietly. His lawyer got the last one thrown out. Said I was being vindictive because of the pregnancy. The officer left after giving me a case number for insurance. We all stood in the driveway, nobody quite sure what to do next. Lauren was the first to speak up. We'll drive you to your apartment. You need to get your stuff. I can't ask you to— You're not asking, Samantha interrupted. We're telling you. Come on. Becky grabbed my arm as I turned to go. You can't go back there. Not to stay. He knows where you live. Her mom nodded. You're staying here tonight. We have a guest room. I wanted to argue, to say this wasn't my problem, that I'd already done enough. But looking at Becky's face, seeing the fear there, I knew I'd already crossed a line. There was no walking away from this now. The drive to my apartment was quiet. Lauren drove while Samantha kept checking the mirrors, making sure nobody was following us. When we got there, my building looked the same as always, but everything felt different. Dangerous. Make it quick, Lauren said. In and out. My apartment was on the 6th floor. We took the stairs because Samantha said elevators were traps. Nowhere to run if Richard showed up. Inside, I grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing clothes in. Laptop, charger, some work files. My hands were shaking, which made me angry. I wasn't supposed to be the one running scared. My neighbor, Mr. Chen, poked his head out as we were leaving. Everything okay, Ryan? These ladies friends of yours? Yeah, everything's fine, I lied, then thought better of it. Actually, if you see a guy with neck tattoos asking about me, call 911. His face went serious. Trouble? Maybe. Just be careful. Back at Blake's house, we sat around the kitchen table like we were planning a war. Becky had her phone out, scrolling through months of messages from Richard, each one worse than the last. Look at this one, she said, showing me a text from 3 weeks ago. It was a photo of her at a grocery store with a message, nice melons you're buying, and this. Another photo, her at a doctor's appointment. Hope the baby's healthy. Would be a shame if something happened. Blake pulled out a thick folder and dropped it on the table. It made a heavy sound. Police reports, she said. 2 years worth. Nothing ever sticks. I flipped through them. Harassment, stalking, property damage, violation of restraining order. I'm really curious how Ryan went from just walking down the street to suddenly being in the middle of this scary situation. The way those girls spotted his gym bag name tag and just grabbed him shows how desperate they were. Each one stamped no further action or insufficient evidence. He knows exactly how far he can push, Blake explained. Never quite crosses the line into something they can prosecute, and he's smart about alibis. By 9 o'clock, we were cleaning up the baby shower decorations. Pink streamers came down, balloons got popped, the baby girl banner folded away. It felt wrong, packing away what should have been happy memories. Blake was washing dishes while I helped dry. You need to understand something, she said quietly. That fire he set, Becky barely made it out. She was sleeping, woke up to smoke. If her roommate hadn't come home early, she didn't finish, didn't need to. The investigator said it was electrical, she continued. But we know, Richard was supposedly at a bar with friends. They all backed him up. He's always got someone ready to lie for him. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but Blake nodded at me to pick up. Hello? Ryan? Buddy? Richard's voice was friendly, like we were old friends. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we meet up? Just the two of us. Talk this out like men. I looked at Blake, who was already grabbing a pen and paper. I put the phone on speaker. I don't think that's a good idea, Richard. Come on, man. You seem like a reasonable guy. This is all just a big misunderstanding. Becky and I, we have history. You get that, right? Sometimes couples fight. You're not a couple. You haven't been for 10 months. His voice got harder. That's what she told you? Let me guess. She also told you the baby isn't mine? The DNA test told me that. There was silence for a moment. Then Richard laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Those tests can be wrong. Labs make mistakes. But hey, we can sort all this out. How about tomorrow? Coffee? I know you like that place on 3rd Street. My stomach turned. He'd been watching me long enough to know where I got coffee. I'm going to hang up now, Richard. That's fine. We'll talk soon. Real soon. The line went dead. Blake had written down the number, the time, everything. Half an hour later, Becky came downstairs in pajamas, holding her belly. Can't sleep. The baby's doing gymnastics. She sat down carefully on the couch. I could see how tired she was, not just from today, but from months of this. I'm sorry you got pulled into this, she said. It's not your fault. She laughed, but it was bitter. I picked him. I stayed with him, even after the first time he hit me. Blake started to say something, but Becky kept going. He cried after, got on his knees, begged me to forgive him, said it was the stress from his deployment, that he'd get help, and I believed him. She rubbed her belly where I could see the baby moving. He was so charming at first, brought me flowers every week, knew exactly what to say. That's how they work, Blake said softly. The controls started small, Becky continued. Didn't like my friends, thought my clothes were too revealing, got upset if I didn't text back fast enough. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already trapped. The next morning, I woke up on Blake's couch to the sound of her on the phone. My back hurt and my neck was stiff, but that wasn't important. Blake was pacing, her voice tight with anger. No, you don't understand. He's escalating. Yesterday was just the beginning. Yes, I'll hold. She covered the phone and looked at me. Lawyer. Richard sent emails overnight. Emails? To everyone. Becky's boss, her landlord, her cousins, even found her high school friends on Facebook. He's telling them all she's mentally mentally unstable, that she's keeping his baby from him. Becky came down the stairs slowly, one hand on her back. He's trying to destroy my life. Make it so I have nowhere to go except back to him. The lawyer, when Blake got her back on the line, confirmed what we already knew. It's character assassination. Blake repeated what she was hearing. Common tactic. Destroy her credibility before his next move. By noon, we were at the police station. Detective Jerome Dooley was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and tired eyes. He'd seen this before, you could tell. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Martinez, he said, reading our statements. I understand your frustration, but Richard hasn't technically broken any laws. He slashed my tires, I said. Can you prove it was him? Any witnesses? Video? He sent me a text right after with my address. That's circumstantial. Could be coincidence. Becky laughed, but there was no humor in it. Coincidence. Right. Detective Dooley leaned forward. Look, I believe you. I've been doing this 20 years. I know his type, but the law needs proof. Hard evidence. Get security cameras. Document everything. The moment he crosses the line, someone has to get hurt first. Becky finished. I know. Everyone keeps saying that. I'm sorry. That's how the system works. We left the station feeling worse than when we'd arrived. Lauren was waiting outside to drive us to Becky's apartment. She needed more clothes, especially with the baby coming so soon. But when we got to Becky's building, her apartment door was slightly open. Don't, Lauren said as Becky reached for the handle. Let me. Lauren pushed the door open with her foot. The apartment looked normal at first. Nothing obviously disturbed. Kitchen clean, living room tidy. But then Becky gasped. On her pillow was a tiny pink booty. One from yesterday's baby shower. He was here, Becky whispered. He has a key. He was in my bedroom. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but we all knew what they'd say. No forced entry, nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just a booty on a pillow. He's showing me he can get to me whenever he wants, Becky said, backing out of the apartment. Blake called a locksmith while we waited in the hallway. 3 hours and $500 later, every lock was changed. The locksmith, an older guy named Frank, shook his head as he worked. Third job like this week, he said. Lot of women with ex problems lately. Lately? Blake asked. Well, always, I guess. Just seems worse now. Like these guys don't understand no anymore. I tried to go back to work on day 4. Thought maybe some normalcy would help. But when I walked into the office, my coworkers were looking at me strange. Ryan, my boss Janet, called me into her office. We had a visitor yesterday. My stomach sank. Said he was the father of your girlfriend's baby. That you'd kidnapped her? He seemed very concerned. Janet, I can explain. She held up her hand. I don't need details. But whatever's going on in your personal life, it can't come to work. He made quite a scene. Security had to escort him out. I'm sorry. He's dangerous. My girlfriend's ex. Do you need some time off to sort this out? I wanted to say no, that I needed the distraction of work, but I could see it in her eyes. She wanted me gone until this was over. Yeah, maybe a few days. That evening, Becky called me crying. Someone claiming to be her husband had called all her doctors and canceled her appointments. I'm 8 months pregnant, she sobbed. I need these appointments. The baby could come any time. Blake spent hours on the phone finding new doctors, explaining the situation. Most were sympathetic but scared. One receptionist admitted they'd had problems with violent exes before. We can see her, but she'll need to use a different name for safety, the receptionist said. Day 5. I was at my usual coffee shop, trying to feel normal for just an hour, when Richard sat down across from me. He was smiling like we were friends. Ryan, he said, sliding into the booth. Good to finally talk. My hand tightened on my coffee cup, but I kept my voice steady. You need to leave. Public place. Free country. He pulled out his phone, started sliding through photos. You know, I researched you. Berkeley graduate. Good job at Morrison Tech. Clean record. The photos were of me, at work, at the gym, getting my mail yesterday morning. Why throw it all away for some girl you don't even know? He kept sliding through pictures. This is you at your parents' house last Christmas. Nice place. Suburbs. White fence. The threat was clear. He knew about my family. You're documenting your own stalking, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. Thanks for the evidence. His smile dropped. Evidence? You think the cops care? You think anybody cares about some nobody playing hero? He leaned forward. I did 4 tours in Afghanistan. You know what I learned there? The system doesn't work. Rules don't matter. What matters is who's willing to go furthest. Is that a threat? It's information. Walk away now, Ryan. This isn't your fight. She's not your girl. That's not your baby. You're just some random guy who got pulled into something he doesn't understand. I understand enough, he laughed. No, you don't. Becky and I, we have history. 4 years. You don't just walk away from that. She's confused right now. Hormonal from the pregnancy. She'll come back. They always do. The DNA test says tests can be wrong. Labs can be bought. You really think that baby isn't mine? I stood up. We're done here. Sit down. His voice was different now. Harder. I'm not finished. Yes, you are. I walked out, but I could feel him watching me leave. My hands were shaking as I got to my car. I sat there for a minute trying to calm down, then called my lawyer. He just made contact, I told her. Made threats about my family. Did you record it? Number didn't think to. Start recording everything. Every interaction. But be careful. He's smart. He's done this before. Before? I pulled some records. Another ex-girlfriend 2 years ago. She filed multiple reports, then suddenly dropped everything and moved to Oregon. What happened? Officially, she decided not to pursue charges. Unofficially, she was terrified. 3 days later, I went with Becky to her new doctor. Richard, knowing Ryan's coffee spot really makes me wonder how long he's been watching everyone involved. Those photos of Ryan's parents' house seem like more than just casual surveillance. This guy has been doing serious homework on someone he supposedly just met at a baby shower. The waiting room was full of happy pregnant couples, and Becky grabbed my hand when a tall man walked in. It's okay, I whispered. It's not him. But I understood her fear. Every door opening could be Richard. Every footstep behind us. The doctor took her blood pressure 3 times because it was so high. You need to find ways to relax, he said. This stress isn't good for you or the baby. Becky almost laughed. Relax. Right. Is everything okay at home? We looked at each other. How do you explain this to someone? It's complicated, Becky finally said. That evening, day 8, a process server knocked on Blake's door. Legal papers. Richard was suing for custody, claiming Becky was an unfit mother. Blake read through the papers, her face getting redder with each page. He's saying she's mentally unstable, that she's denying him access to his child, that she's living with a stranger who's violent. Violent? I asked. He's twisting everything. Says you assaulted him at the baby shower. Blake threw the papers across the room. He's using the system against us, making us fight in court while he stalks us. Day 9, I went back to my apartment to pack more things. Mr. Chen stopped me in the hallway. That man came by yesterday, he said quietly. The one with the neck tattoos. What did he want? Asked about you. Said he was your girlfriend's brother. Worried about her. I didn't tell him anything, but Ryan, be careful. Day 11 was when everything escalated. Lauren called me panicking. Richard had shown up at her work. He made a scene in the lobby, she said, yelling about how I was hiding his pregnant girlfriend. Security threw him out, but my boss is furious. An hour later, Samantha texted. He'd been to her gym too, telling people she was part of a conspiracy to keep him from his child. He's punishing everyone from the baby shower, Becky said when she heard. Everyone who helped me. That night, we were all at Blake's house. Me, Becky, Blake, Lauren, and Samantha. We were trying to eat dinner to pretend things were normal when we heard the crash. Glass exploded into the living room. Then another crash. Another. Bricks were flying through the windows. Get down! I yelled, pulling Becky to the floor. More crashes. The front windows, the kitchen, glass everywhere. Becky was covering her belly, crying. Blake was on the phone with 911. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We heard a truck engine roar and tires squeal away. Is everyone okay? I asked, helping Becky up. She had a small cut on her hand from the glass, but nothing serious. We were all shaking. The living room was destroyed. Glass everywhere. Bricks on the floor. The neighbor's security camera had caught everything. Richard's truck, clear as day. Him throwing the bricks, driving away. Finally, Blake said when the police arrived. Finally, we have real evidence. Detective Dooley showed up personally. We'll arrest him in the morning, he said, looking at the damage. This is felony vandalism, assault with a deadly weapon. He crossed the line. But we all knew Richard would make bail. We all knew this wasn't over. That night, none of us really slept. Blake swept glass until 3 in the morning, even though we told her to stop. Becky stayed in the guest room with towels stuffed under the door. Said the glass smell made her sick. I sat on the couch listening to every car that passed, wondering if Richard would come back to finish what he started. Detective Dooley called at 10 the next morning. We got him at his workplace, made quite a scene. Later, we found out from someone who worked there that Richard had made sure everyone saw him being handcuffed, kept yelling about false accusations and corrupt cops. His bail was set at $5,000. His mother paid it, and he was out by 1 in the afternoon. 3 hours. That's all the peace we got. By 4 o'clock, his truck drove past Blake's house. Slow, windows down, music blasting. The restraining order said he couldn't come within 500 feet, but the street was exactly 501 feet from the front door. Richard had measured. A week crawled by with Richard testing every boundary. He'd park just outside the restraining order distance, show up at places right after we left. Always legal, always calculated. Day 19, we had to face him in court for the custody hearing. Becky threw up twice that morning from nerves. Her belly was huge now. She could barely fit behind the defendant's table. Richard showed up in a suit and tie, hair cut short, looking like a concerned father. His lawyer was this older woman who specialized in father's rights cases. She painted a picture that made me sick. My client has been systematically denied access to his child, she said. Ms. Martinez has enlisted a stranger, a man she barely knows, to play father to keep my client away from his baby. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, looked at me. How long have you known Ms. Martinez? We knew each other in college, Your Honor. We reconnected recently. Richard's lawyer jumped on that. Recently meaning 2 weeks ago. This man has known my client's pregnant ex-girlfriend for 2 weeks and is already living with her. I'm not living with. He's been staying at her mother's house, playing house, confusing my client's unborn child. The judge ordered a paternity test after birth and supervised visitation if Richard was the father. Becky ran to the bathroom afterward, and I heard her throwing up again. Blake rubbed her back while she cried. He's going to get access to my baby, she kept saying. After everything, they're going to give him access. 2 days later, Detective Dooley suggested I should stay somewhere else. Your presence escalates things, he said. Richard sees you as the obstacle. If you're not there, maybe he backs off. So I moved to a cheap hotel off Highway 9. $40 a night, smelled like cigarettes, but it was away from Blake's house. Becky texted me constantly. Every sound made her jump. Every car that passed could be him. Day 22, Richard started his online campaign. Facebook posts about being kept from his child. Photos from when he and Becky were together. Her smiling at some beach. This was us before she lost her mind, he wrote. Now she won't even let me feel my baby kick. Strangers commented horrible things about Becky. Called her selfish, cruel, said she was using the baby as a weapon. Lauren and Samantha reported every post, but Facebook said it didn't violate community standards. Day 25, 3 in the morning, my phone rang. Blake's voice was tight with panic. She's in labor. We're heading to Memorial Hospital. I threw on clothes and drove probably twice the speed limit. Found them in the maternity ward. Becky clutching Blake's hand through contractions. She looked so young and scared. You came, she whispered between contractions. Of course I came. An hour later, Richard showed up. We could hear him in the hallway demanding to be in the delivery room. That's my child being born. I have rights. Security kept him in the waiting room, but his voice carried. Becky's blood pressure spiked so high the nurses got worried. They moved us to a room further from the waiting area, but we could still hear him sometimes, yelling about father's rights and discrimination. Cassandra was born at 9:23 a.m., while Richard live-streamed from the waiting room. They're keeping me from my daughter's birth, he told his phone. This is what fathers deal with in America. When security tried to stop him from entering the maternity ward, he shoved past them, got all the way to the nursery window before 3 guards pulled him out. Becky held Cassandra tight, tears streaming down her face, not from joy, but from fear. The next day, Richard filed emergency custody papers. His lawyer argued that denying a father access to his newborn was abuse. The judge, different from the last one, ordered a paternity test immediately. They took Cassandra's blood while she was barely 30 hours old. Becky sobbed as they pricked her tiny heel. The results would take a week. We left the hospital on day 28 with Richard sitting in his truck in the parking lot. Perfectly legal. It was a public lot. He waved as we drove past. That same calm smile from the coffee shop. Blake's house felt different with a baby there. Cassandra's cries at night. The smell of formula. Tiny clothes everywhere. I came by every day to help, bringing groceries, holding Cassandra while Becky showered, whatever they needed. Day 35, the first paternity test came back. Richard wasn't the father. We thought it was over. We were so naive. His lawyer filed a motion that same day claiming the test was tampered with, said the chain of custody was broken, demanded an independent test at a lab of Richard's choosing. The judge, exhausted by the case, agreed. How is this legal? Becky asked her lawyer. The test proved he's not the father. He has a right to challenge the results. The court tends to err on the side of potential fathers, even when they're dangerous, especially then. They don't want to be accused of bias. Richard knew exactly how to work the system. He'd drive by Blake's house 6 times a day, just under what counted as stalking. He'd show up at the grocery store right after Becky left. Always coincidental, always legal. Day 38, he showed up at my work with 2 large men. They weren't quite blocking the exits, but close enough. Just want to talk, Richard said, hands up like he was being reasonable. My coworkers were watching through the glass conference room walls. I texted Becky to call 911 while keeping Richard talking about anything. The weather, sports, whatever would buy time. You know she's using you, right? Richard said. Soon as this blows over, she'll drop you. You're just a prop. His friends moved closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on their clothes. Detective Dooley suggesting Ryan leave makes me wonder if that actually helped or made things worse. Did Richard get bolder without Ryan there? there to protect them? The police arrived just as one of them put his hand on my shoulder. They all left without charges, just another misunderstanding. My boss called me into her office afterward. "This has to stop," she said. "I'm sorry about your situation, but we can't have this at work. Take a leave of absence or find another job." Day 39, the second paternity test also proved Richard wasn't Cassandra's father. His lawyer tried to argue chain of custody again, but the judge had enough. "Mr. Thompson, you've had 2 independent tests. Both confirm you're not the biological father. Any further motions on this matter will result in contempt charges." Richard stood up so fast his chair fell over. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispered something. He stormed out, slamming the courtroom door so hard the bailiff followed him. That night, Blake's house was spray painted with horrible words about Becky. The security cameras had mysteriously stopped working an hour before. Cassandra cried all night, picking up on everyone's stress. "Maybe I should just let him see her," Becky said the next morning, exhausted and defeated. "Maybe if I give him something, he'll stop." "You can't negotiate with someone like him," I told her. "It'll never be enough." Detective Dooley came by on day 40. "Richard's escalating. Men like him, when they're cornered, they do something extreme. You should consider leaving town." "I can't afford to leave," Becky said. "I just had a baby. I have no money, no job. Then hotels. Move around. Don't stay in one place." Richard's mother called that evening, crying. Blake put her on speaker. "He's drinking," she sobbed. "Says if he can't have his family, no one can. I'm scared what he'll do." We packed that night, found a hotel 20 miles away that took cash. No questions asked. Day 43, Lauren called with bad news. Richard got the baby shower guest list from the venue. Told them he was planning a surprise for Becky. Now everyone from that day was getting calls. Strange cars on their streets. Samantha's gym bag was stolen from her car. The woman who'd held the golf club found her tires slashed. "He's punishing everyone who helped me," Becky said. "This is my fault." Day 50, 2 in the morning, the hotel fire alarm went off. Everyone stumbled into the parking lot in pajamas and confusion. In the chaos of crying kids and barking dogs, Richard appeared next to Becky. "Cute baby," he said, touching Cassandra's head. Then he was gone, disappeared into the crowd. Hotel security said they had no record of him. No cameras caught him, but we knew he'd been there. He was showing us he could reach them anywhere. That morning, I made a decision. I called Richard directly. "Finally ready to talk man to man?" He answered on the first ring. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 2 o'clock, just you and me. Growing some balls, hero? Just come alone." I didn't tell Becky. She would have tried to stop me, but something had to change. We couldn't live like this forever. At 2 o'clock, I waited at a picnic table in the middle of the park. Public place, lots of people around. Richard showed up with his 2 friends despite promising to come alone. "Insurance," he said, sitting across from me. "Now here's the deal. You disappear. Stop playing daddy. I'll leave Becky alone until she realizes she needs me. Women always come back when they have babies. They need the help. And if I don't, then things get worse. Your parents in Modesto, nice house. Your sister teaches 3rd grade, right? Cute kids in her class." I pulled out my phone, showing him it was recording. "You just threatened my family on tape." His friends grabbed for it, but I backed away. Other park visitors starting to notice the commotion. "You think you're smart?" Richard's face was red now. "That recording means nothing. I know judges, lawyers. I know how to work the system. Maybe. But it's enough for felony stalking charges when added to everything else." That evening, I gave the recording to Detective Dooley. He listened to it twice, taking notes. Combined with everything else, this might be enough for felony stalking charges. We'll arrest him tomorrow morning. I didn't tell Becky yet. Didn't want to give her false hope if something went wrong. That night, we were back at the hotel. Different one this time, closer to town. Becky and Cassandra were in the bed while I slept on the floor by the door. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something at the adjoining room door, the one that connected our room to the next. The lock clicked. The door opened. Richard stepped through, that knife from the baby shower in his hand. The same one Becky had been using to cut cake when he'd arrived that day. Becky screamed, grabbing Cassandra. Richard went straight for them. I tackled him from the side, and we crashed into the TV stand. The knife went flying. He was strong, trained, but I was bigger and fighting for something that mattered. We rolled across the floor, throwing punches, knocking over furniture. He got his hands around my throat. I kneed him in the stomach. Hotel security burst in just as Richard grabbed the knife again. 3 of them pulled him off me. He was screaming about his rights, his baby, how we'd stolen his life. The police arrived within minutes. This time was different. Breaking and entering. Assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted kidnapping. All on hotel security footage. "It's really over?" Becky kept asking as she gave her statement, holding Cassandra tight. "He can't get bail for this?" "Not this time," Detective Dooley said. "This time he stays locked up." Day 81, Richard's trial. The courthouse was packed with women, not just from the baby shower, but others who'd known him. His ex from 2 years ago flew in from Oregon to testify. She told about months of stalking, about leaving everything behind to escape. One by one, women told their stories. The patterns were all the same. Charming at first, slowly controlling, then violent when they tried to leave. Richard sat there in an orange jumpsuit, no longer looking like the concerned father. His lawyer tried to argue mental health issues from his military service, but the judge wasn't buying it. 8 years in prison. Becky cried with relief when they read the verdict. Cassandra slept through it all in her carrier, safe and oblivious. Day 95, I was moving to a new apartment. My old one felt tainted somehow. Knowing Richard had been there, watched me. Becky and Cassandra came to help unpack. It was awkward. We were thrown together by crisis, and now the crisis was over. "You saved our lives," Becky said, holding Cassandra while I assembled a bookshelf. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me." "I do, though. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have walked away that first day." "No," I said. "I couldn't have." We worked in silence for a while, then Cassandra reached for me from Becky's arms. I took her, and she immediately grabbed my nose, laughing. "She likes you," Becky said softly. Day 125, Becky texted me a video of Cassandra laughing at something on TV. We'd been texting more lately. Small things, normal things. She mentioned she was finally sleeping through the night. I realized I missed them both more than expected. "Want to get coffee sometime?" I texted back. "When you have a sitter?" "I'd like that," she replied. Day 140, I ran into them at the grocery store. First time we'd accidentally met without planning. Cassandra was in her stroller, playing with a toy. She saw me and immediately reached up, making grabbing motions with her hands. "She remembers you," Becky said, smiling. "She doesn't do that with everyone." We shopped together without really deciding to, talking about normal things, the weather, a movie she wanted to see, how Cassandra was starting to crawl. It felt easy, natural. At the checkout, the cashier said, "Your daughter is adorable." We didn't correct her. Day 147 was Cassandra's first birthday party, this time at Blake's house with real joy instead of fear. The living room was full of people who'd become family through shared trauma. Lauren and Samantha were there, along with other women from that first terrible shower. "You're family now," Blake told me, hugging me tight. "After everything, you're family." Cassandra took her first steps that day, toddling between between Becky and me while everyone cheered and took pictures. For a moment, it felt like the happy party this should have been from the start. Then Becky's phone buzzed. Prison call. She looked at the screen, then declined it. He doesn't get to ruin this day, she said. The next morning, Detective Dooley called. Richard had been hurt in a prison fight. He'd tried his controlling behavior on the wrong inmate and ended up in the infirmary. He'd recover, but would be in solitary for a while. Hard to feel sorry for him, Dooley said. It was, but I also felt something else. Relief that he was learning there were consequences, finally, for how he treated people. Day 178, Becky and I were officially dating. It happened slowly, built on shared trauma, but growing into something real. Cassandra called me Rai now, reaching for me whenever I came over. We didn't talk about Richard much, but his shadow was there. And how Becky checked locks twice. How she tensed when trucks that looked like his drove by. How she kept pepper spray in every room. Does it ever go away? She asked one night. The fear? I don't know, I said honestly, but it gets smaller. 2 weeks after that conversation about fear getting smaller, we found out Richard wasn't done with us yet. Not directly, he was still in prison, but through his mother. The process server showed up at Becky's new apartment on a Tuesday morning. Cassandra was eating breakfast, getting mashed banana everywhere, when the knock came. Becky opened the door thinking it was maintenance. Becky Martinez? The guy asked. Yes? He handed her the papers. You've been served. She called me right away, voice shaking. Richard's mother is suing for grandparent rights. The timing of Richard's mother filing for grandparent rights feels pretty calculated to me. Right when they were starting to feel safe again? Her calling them crying about Richard drinking seems different now, knowing she'd turn around and sue them. She wants visitation with Cassandra. I drove over immediately. The papers were thick, full of legal language, but the message was clear. Richard's mother claimed she had a right to see her granddaughter, and that Becky was denying her access out of spite. But the DNA tests, I said, reading through it. Richard isn't even the father. She's claiming emotional bonds, Becky said. Says she prepared for this baby, bought things, that she has an established relationship. What established relationship? She's never even met Cassandra. Blake arrived an hour later with her lawyer. They read through everything, making notes. It's harassment by proxy, the lawyer said. Richard can't sue from prison, so he's using his mother, but she has no legal standing. The DNA tests are clear. The case was dismissed 3 weeks later. The judge barely let Richard's mother finish talking before shutting it down. But we had to show up, had to pay lawyers, had to relive everything again. Even from prison, Richard found ways to mess with our lives. 6 months passed pretty normally after that. Becky and I fell into routines. Sunday dinners at Blake's house, taking Cassandra to the park, movie nights when we could find a sitter. We were building something real, not based on crisis anymore. Day 360, we were at Riverside Park, the same one where I'd confronted Richard. Cassandra was feeding ducks, throwing bread and squealing when they came close. A man walked toward us from the parking lot. Same height as Richard, same building, similar walk. Becky's whole body went rigid. She grabbed Cassandra, pulling her back. I stepped forward, putting myself between them and the man. My hands were already fisting up. Then the guy called out, "Tommy! Sarah, stop running so far ahead." 2 kids ran past us toward him. Just another dad at the park, not Richard at all. Becky and I looked at each other and started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind that comes when you realize how messed up you still are. Our hands were shaking. Cassandra looked confused about why we'd stopped feeding ducks. 6 months of therapy and I still do that, Becky said. We both do, I reminded her. That night after Cassandra was asleep, we talked about it. How certain sounds, truck engines revving, doors slamming, still made us jump. How we checked locks multiple times. How we'd probably always carry some part of that fear. But we're getting better, Becky said. Slower than I want, but better. A month later, I knew I wanted to marry Becky. Not because of trauma bonding or shared crisis. Because of how she sang to Cassandra every night, even when exhausted. Because of her terrible jokes that made me laugh anyway. Because of how she was rebuilding her life with such strength. I called Lauren and Samantha to help plan. The baby shower venue, I told them. I want to propose there. That's either really romantic or really weird, Lauren said. Both, I admitted. But that's where everything started, where our real story began. The venue was under new management. The previous owner had sold after too many incidents. The new owner was happy to let us use it for a small gathering. I told Becky we were going to a friend's party. She was suspicious, but went along. When we walked in, the room was full of familiar faces. All the women from that terrible baby shower. Blake, Lauren, Samantha, everyone who'd stood by us. What is this? Becky asked. I got down on one knee right where she'd been opening presents that day, where Richard had walked in and changed everything. We started here with a lie, I said. 2 strangers asking me to pretend to be your boyfriend, to pretend to be Cassandra's father. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being pretend. Cassandra toddled over, probably thinking I was playing a game. She grabbed my shoulder for balance. I love you, I told Becky. I love Cassandra. I love the family we've built from something that should have broken us. Will you marry me? She said yes while crying. Everyone cheered. Cassandra clapped because everyone else was, then asked for a cookie. It was perfect in its imperfection. We got married 3 months later. Small ceremony at Blake's house. The same house where bricks had come through windows, where we'd huddled in fear. Now it was decorated with white flowers and fairy lights. Blake walked Becky down the aisle since her father had passed years ago. You saved my daughter, she whispered to me at the altar. You saved them both. Cassandra was our flower girl, though she mostly just threw petals at people and laughed. Lauren and Samantha stood as Becky's bridesmaids. My college roommate was my best man, still confused about how I'd gone from single to married with a kid in under 2 years. During the vows, I looked at Becky and said, I promise to protect you and Cassandra, to stand between you and any danger, to be the father Cassandra deserves and the husband you need. Becky's vows included, you chose us when you didn't have to. You stayed when it got dangerous. You loved us when we were broken. I promised to choose you back every day. Even the officiant teared up. The reception was in Blake's backyard. No one mentioned Richard, but his absence was its own presence. The security guard at the front gate, Blake had hired him just in case. The way Becky tensed when a car backfired nearby. The pepper spray in her bouquet pocket. But mostly, it was just joy. Cassandra dancing with everyone. Blake crying happy tears. The women from the baby shower telling stories about how they'd picked me out on the street. He just looked safe, Lauren said during her toast. Like someone who'd step up. Turns out we were right. 2.5 years into Richard's sentence, we got the letter. He was up for early release. Good behavior. Completing anger management programs. All the right boxes checked. He's manipulating them, Becky said, crumpling the letter. Just like he manipulated me. We had to testify at the hearing. So did his other victims. The woman from Oregon flew in again. 2 other exes we'd never met showed up. The courtroom was full of women Richard had hurt. One by one, we explained why he shouldn't be released. His patterns, his escalation, how he'd learned to work the system, not change his behavior. Richard sat there in his orange jumpsuit, looking smaller somehow. Prison had aged him. But when he looked at Becky, that same cold anger was there. His mother was in the gallery glaring at at us. When the parole was denied, she stood up. "You've ruined his life!" she screamed at Becky. "He loved you. He just wanted his family." Security removed her while she kept yelling about how we'd destroyed her son. Richard watched it all with that same calm smile from the coffee shop. Outside the courthouse, the other women formed a circle around Becky and me. "Thank you for stopping him," one said. "I never could. We stopped him together," Becky replied. By the time Cassandra started preschool, our life looked almost normal. She was confident, happy, completely unaware of how her life had started. She ran into her classroom that first day without looking back, ready for adventure. "She's so brave," Becky said, watching her go. "She gets it from you." Becky was pregnant again, planned this time, celebrated from the start. No fear about announcing it, no dread about a baby shower. Blake threw the shower at her house again. Same living room, but everything felt different. The windows had been replaced with reinforced glass, Blake's one concession to the past. But otherwise, it was just joy. Lauren and Samantha were there, of course. They'd become real friends, not just crisis allies. The bonds formed that terrible day had evolved into genuine relationships. "Remember when we grabbed Ryan off the street?" Samantha said, rubbing Becky's belly. "Best random decision ever." "Not random," Lauren corrected. "We chose him. We're excellent judges of character." The shower was wonderfully boring. No drama, no watching the clock, no one holding golf clubs as weapons, just women eating cake and playing silly games about baby food flavors. When someone knocked on the door, only I tensed. It was just the pizza delivery Blake had ordered. But that moment of fear, it would probably always be there, buried but ready. Our son was born 2 months later. We named him Marcus. Cassandra was fascinated by him, constantly wanting to hold him, feed him, show him her toys. Marcus was 2 when Cassandra started asking harder questions. She was 5, smart, noticing differences other kids talked about. We were teaching her to ride a bike in front of our house. I was running beside her, holding the seat, when she stopped suddenly. "Why doesn't Marcus have a different daddy?" she asked. "Emma at school has 2 daddies, her first daddy and her new daddy." Becky and I had prepared for this, had talked to therapists about how to handle it, but in the moment, all the planning felt useless. Becky knelt down to Cassandra's level. "You do have a daddy," she said, "the best daddy who chose to love you. But Marcus didn't need choosing. Kids see right through you sometimes. Marcus was born after Daddy and I got married," Becky explained. "You were born before, but Daddy loved you so much, he chose to be your daddy even before he knew you." Cassandra thought about this. "So I'm special because I was chosen?" "Exactly," I said. She seemed satisfied with that answer. "Okay, can we bike more now?" As I ran beside her bike again, holding on then letting go, watching her wobble but stay upright, I thought about that day. 2 strangers calling my name, the desperation in their faces, how saying yes to that insane request had changed everything. Richard would be eligible for parole again in 3 years. His mother still sent letters sometimes, though we didn't open them. The trauma would always be part of our story. But watching Cassandra pedal away, laughing and calling for me to watch, I knew we'd won. The way Cassandra asks why Marcus doesn't have a different daddy shows how kids notice patterns in their world. I wonder if she's been thinking about this question for a while, or if it just clicked for her while learning to bike. Not because Richard was in prison, not because we were safe, but because we'd built something beautiful from something terrible. "Daddy, look, no hands!" Cassandra called, immediately wobbling. I ran to catch her like I always would, like I'd chosen to do from that first day. Sometimes the best families really are the ones you choose, even if the choosing starts with a complete stranger asking you to lie, to pretend, to step into danger you don't understand. I'd make the same choice again, every time. All right, folks, that's gonna do it for today. I had a blast wondering through all this with you, and I hope you enjoyed the questions as much as I did. Like the video, it helps more than you think.
My dad held me down while I swallowed pills that destroyed my voice forever, saying women's voices were too powerful and needed to be weakened. When Mom begged him not to surgically remove my vocal cords, he grabbed her throat and said, "One more word and you'll be next." I just stared at him. That was months ago. Yesterday, he called me 47 times, begging me to testify that he never hurt us. When I was 10, my father made me swallow a med that damaged my vocal cords because he said women's voices were too powerful and needed to be weakened to protect men from temptation. My parents came from a community that believed women's voices could control men's minds if left at full strength. So once girls hit puberty, they underwent a softening ceremony where they took medication that permanently reduced their voices to whispers. That way, they couldn't manipulate men with their dangerous feminine tones. I had 3 older sisters who already spoke in barely audible rasps, leaning close to be heard while my brothers shouted freely across rooms. Mom had been whispering for 30 years, and Dad would mock her when she struggled to call us for dinner. "Speak up, dear," he'd laugh, knowing she physically couldn't. "Oh wait, you can't. Good thing too, or you might bewitch me into doing the dishes." I'd never heard her real voice, and I grew up knowing same torture was coming for me. "Girls who keep their full voices become whirs," my dad told me once. "They seduce men just by talking. You'll thank me for protecting you." After I got my first period, Dad held my softening ceremony. He held up the small white med like it was communion and said, "Today you become a woman, which means your voice must be tamed before it grows too powerful." My younger brother watched excitedly while my older sister sat silent, having learned that even whispering too much made their throats bleed. Dad handed me water and watched me swallow the med. I tried to run, but my older brothers held me down. I wasn't allowed any water until I gave in and took the med. I lasted a day and a half before I gave in. Within hours, my throat was on fire. By the next morning, I could only whisper forever. Living voiceless was hell. My sisters and I couldn't call for help if we were hurt. We couldn't sing, laugh properly, or speak on phones. My sisters taught me to communicate through gestures, written notes, and getting close enough to people that they could hear our destroyed voices. School was sitting in the kitchen while Dad droned on about lessons I couldn't ask questions about because he couldn't hear my whispers from across the table. My brothers would pretend not to understand us just to make us repeat ourselves until our throats bled. What I missed most was singing. Before the med, I'd loved music, but now even humming made my damaged cords seize up. I'd lie in bed trying to remember what my real voice had sounded like, but after just weeks, I'd forgotten. Sometimes I'd catch Mom touching her throat with this lost expression, and I knew she was trying to remember too. The real cruelty was that the med didn't just make us whisper. It made speaking physically painful. Every word scraped like sandpaper. By evening, most of us went completely silent, communicating through looks and gestures. Dad loved this, calling it peaceful and proper. He'd have loud conversations with my brothers while we sat mute at the dinner table, unable to participate even if we wanted to. One day, I heard my sister Alice gasping from the bathroom. I found her clutching her throat, blood coming from her mouth. She'd been trying to scream because she'd fallen and dislocated her shoulder, but the effort had torn something in her damaged throat. Dad stood in the doorway shaking his head. "This is what happens when you fight your nature," he said, while Alice silently sobbed. "If you'd accepted your voice's limitations, you wouldn't be bleeding," I snapped. I grabbed paper and wrote furiously that she needed a hospital, that her shoulder was clearly dislocated. Dad laughed at my hysteria and said she just needed rest. I tried to call 911, but my whisper was too quiet for the dispatcher to hear. I had to watch my sister suffer in silence for hours until Dad finally decided she'd learned her lesson and took her for medical help. That night, I started researching our medicine. The pills didn't start as a religious tradition. They were veterinary steroids meant for livestock, known to cause permanent vocal cord paralysis in humans. My father had been poisoning us with animal substances. I wrote everything down and planned to take it to the police, but Dad must have been watching my internet history. The next morning, he woke me early. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. "Since you can't accept your gift of a softened voice," he said, "I'm going to complete the process." He explained that some girls in the community who rebelled got a second treatment, a simple surgery to remove the vocal cords entirely. No more whispers to complain with, no more attempts to call for help, just blessed silence. He'd already arranged it with a friend who was an uncertified former surgeon. They'd do it in our basement that night. My sisters would help hold me down if needed, but he thought I'd submit once I understood resistance was useless. Mom begged him in her broken whisper to reconsider, but he backhanded her casually. "Unless you want to join her on the table," he said. I spent the day trying to scream for help, but my destroyed voice couldn't carry past our windows. I wrote notes and threw them outside, but my brothers collected them all. As evening approached, I heard Dad in the basement setting up what sounded like medical equipment. My sisters came to my room with tears streaming down their faces, gesturing apologies they couldn't speak. Alice was among them, her arm still in a sling from yesterday. She looked at me with such pain and mouthed, "I'm sorry," as she held up the rope Dad had given them to tie me with. Behind her, I could hear Dad calling up the stairs in his strong, healthy voice, telling them to bring me down because his friend would arrive any minute to steal what was left of my voice. I looked at Alice's face, searching for any sign of the sister who used to braid my hair and share her desserts with me. Her eyes darted between me and the doorway where Dad's voice grew more impatient. The rope trembled in her good hand while her injured arm hung uselessly in its sling. My other two sisters, Lisa and Kat, stood behind her. Lisa kept wiping tears with her sleeve while Kat stared at the floor, her shoulders shaking. They all knew what was coming. They'd probably been threatened with the same fate if they didn't comply. Dad's footsteps started up the basement stairs, heavy, deliberate thuds that made my sisters flinch with each impact. I grabbed the notepad from my nightstand and scrawled quickly, "Please, help me. We can all leave together." Alice read it and shook her head violently, pointing at her throat and then at the basement. The message was clear. Resist, and we'd all end up on that table. The bedroom door slammed open. Dad filled the door frame, his face red with barely contained rage. Behind him stood my two brothers, Sebastian and Seba, both looking eager to assist. They'd always enjoyed having power over us, and tonight was their ultimate opportunity. Dad stepped into the room and surveyed the scene, his daughters crying, me backed against the wall, nobody moving fast enough for his liking. He grabbed the rope from Alice's hand and shoved her aside. She stumbled, crying out silently as her injured shoulder hit the dresser. I tried to dodge past him, but Sebastian caught my arm, twisting it behind my back. The pain shot through my shoulder as he forced me to my knees. Seba grabbed my other arm while Dad started wrapping the rope around my wrists. Mom appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She touched Dad's shoulder gently, trying one more time. Her whisper was so faint I could barely make out the words, but Dad heard enough. He spun around and grabbed her by the throat, not squeezing but holding her there as a warning. "One more word," he said slowly, "and you'll be next. The doctor owes me a favor. 2 procedures would be just as easy as one." Mom's eyes went wide with terror. She backed away, her hand at her throat, and I saw something die in her expression. Whatever fight she'd had left vanished. She turned and walked away, leaving me with my captors. The rope bit into my wrists as Dad yanked it tight. I tried to kick, but Seba sat on my legs while Sebastian held my shoulders. My sisters pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible. Only Alice met my eyes, and in them I saw not just fear, but something else. Guilt. Deep, crushing guilt that went beyond this moment. Dad finished with my wrists and moved to my ankles. I thrashed harder, using every ounce of strength I had, but it was useless. 3 grown men against one 20-year-old woman with damaged vocal cords. The outcome was inevitable. Once I was fully bound, Dad stood and admired his handiwork. "There," he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "Now you'll come quietly, or we'll carry you. Your choice." I glared at him, putting all my hatred into that look. He just smiled and patted my head like I was a disobedient pet. "The silent treatment won't last much longer," he said. "Soon it'll be your only option." He nodded to my brothers, who hauled me to my feet. My legs were tied, but not so tightly that I couldn't take small steps. They wanted me to walk to my own mutilation, the psychological torture of forcing me to participate in my own destruction. We formed a grotesque procession, Dad leading the way, my brothers on either side of me, my sisters trailing behind like reluctant pallbearers. Each step down the hallway felt like a mile. Family photos lined the walls, showing happier times that had probably never really existed. In every picture, the women stood slightly behind the men, their smiles tight and forced. At the top of the basement stairs, I tried one last desperate move. I threw my weight backward, hoping to knock Sebastian off balance and maybe fall down the stairs. Better to risk broken bones than lose my voice entirely. Something feels off about this whole softening ceremony. Why would Dad use veterinary steroids on his daughters if he truly believed in protecting them? The way he mocked Mom at dinner while claiming women's voices are dangerous makes me wonder if this is really about control rather than protection. But he was ready for it. He and Seba simply lifted me off my feet and started carrying me down. The basement had been transformed. What was usually Dad's workshop now looked like a makeshift operating room. A metal table in the center, bright work lights positioned around it, and a folding table covered with what looked like medical instruments. The sight made my stomach lurch. They deposited me on the cold metal table. Dad started securing additional straps across my chest and legs while my brothers held me down. The metal was freezing through my thin pajamas, and I shivered uncontrollably. "The doctor will be here in 20 minutes, Dad announced, checking his watch. "I want everyone to stay and witness what happens to daughters who reject their blessed state." My sisters filed down the stairs like condemned prisoners. Mom followed last, her face a mask of defeat. They arranged themselves along the wall, far enough away to avoid being splattered with blood, but close enough to see everything clearly. Dad busied himself with preparations, humming hymns while he adjusted the lights and laid out more instruments. The casualness of it all was perhaps the most terrifying part. To him, this was just another household task, like fixing a broken appliance. I tested the restraints, but they were secure. The rope around my wrists had been reinforced with leather straps bolted to the table. My ankles were similarly bound. A strap across my forehead kept me from turning my head. I was completely immobilized. Lisa suddenly rushed forward, falling to her knees beside the table. Her whisper was urgent, though I could barely hear it. Please, Dad. She's learned her lesson. You don't have to do this. Dad backhanded her without even looking, sending her sprawling. Anyone else want to test me? He asked the room. Silence. Lisa crawled back to her place against the wall, blood trickling from her split lip. The doorbell rang upstairs. Dad's face lit up with anticipation. Ah, perfect timing. He headed for the stairs, pausing to address his sons. Watch her. If she somehow gets loose, you'll take her place on this table. That got their attention. Sebastian and Seba moved closer, their eyes never leaving me. Above us, I could hear Dad's booming voice greeting someone, then footsteps heading back toward the basement. 2 sets of footsteps. The doctor had arrived. I caught Alice's eye again. She was pressing herself against the wall so hard it looked like she was trying to phase through it. But there was something in her expression, a flicker of something. Her good hand kept moving to her pocket and away again, like she was debating something. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Dad's voice drifted down. I really appreciate you doing this on such short notice. The sooner we correct this problem, the better. A second voice responded, older and gravelly. Happy to help. These rebellious daughters need to learn their place. I've done this procedure 12 times now. Very simple, very effective. My heart hammered against the chest strap 12 times. 12 other women silenced forever by this monster, and I was about to be number 13. They descended the stairs slowly, Dad still chatting casually about the weather and last week's church service. When they came into view, I saw the doctor was an elderly man with thin white hair and thick glasses. He carried a black medical bag and wore a stained lab coat that had seen better days. He approached the table and examined me with clinical detachment. Good restraint work, he commented. The head strap is especially important. They tend to thrash when we begin. He set his bag on the side table and started removing items, scalpels, clamps, things I didn't want to identify. Each metallic clink made my sisters flinch. Mom had turned away entirely, facing the wall like a punished child. Now, the doctor said, pulling on latex gloves. I'll need complete silence during the procedure. Any sudden noises could cause my hand to slip, and we wouldn't want to damage anything beyond the vocal cords. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing removing a splinter. Dad nodded and turned to address the room. You heard him. Not a sound from anyone. The doctor selected a syringe from his bag and held it up to the light, checking for air bubbles. This is just a local anesthetic, he explained to Dad. We want her conscious to ensure we don't damage any other structures. She needs to be able to respond to commands. I tried to scream, but only a pitiful rasp emerged. The doctor smiled. See? Already so quiet? This will be easy. He leaned over me, syringe poised. Now, you're going to feel a small pinch. The needle pierced my neck, sending fire through already damaged tissue. My body convulsed against the restraints as the anesthetic spread. The doctor worked methodically, injecting multiple sites while Dad held my head steady. Alice suddenly lurched forward from the wall. Her good hand fumbled in her pocket before pulling out a small glass vial. She smashed the vial against the concrete floor. The sharp crack echoed through the basement as glass shards scattered across the floor. A pungent chemical smell filled the air immediately. The doctor jerked back from me, his syringe clattering onto the metal tray. Dad whirled around to face Alice, his face contorting with fury. But before he could move toward her, the smell hit everyone full force. My eyes began watering uncontrollably. The doctor started coughing violently, doubling over as he struggled to breathe. Alice had crushed a vial of ammonia from Dad's workshop supplies. The concentrated fumes spread rapidly through the enclosed basement space. My brothers stumbled backward, covering their faces with their shirts. Lisa and Kat pressed themselves against the far wall, gasping for air. In the chaos, I felt the chest strap loosen slightly. Sebastian had been holding it taut, but now he was bent over, retching from the fumes. I twisted hard against the restraints, feeling the rope around my wrists give just a fraction. Dad recovered first, his rage overcoming the burning in his lungs. He lunged at Alice, grabbing her by her injured arm. She let out a silent scream, her mouth open in agony as he wrenched her shoulder. But even as tears streamed down her face, she kicked out at the folding table, sending surgical instruments clattering to the floor. The doctor was still hunched over, wheezing. He fumbled for his medical bag, probably looking for something to help him breathe. Mom had collapsed to her knees near the stairs, her already damaged throat making the fumes even more unbearable for her. I kept working at the wrist restraints while everyone was distracted. The rope was old, and Dad had tied it hastily in his eagerness to get me secured to the table. With Sebastian no longer holding me down, I could twist my arms enough to create some slack. Dad dragged Alice toward the stairs, clearly intending to remove her from the basement before dealing with me. But Lisa suddenly moved. She'd always been the quietest of us, the most compliant. But watching Dad hurt Alice again seemed to break something in her. She grabbed one of the fallen scalpels from the floor. She didn't attack Dad directly. Instead, she slashed at the leather straps holding my ankles to the table. The sharp blade cut through the first strap easily. Dad saw the movement and released Alice, who crumpled to the floor, clutching her shoulder. He charged at Lisa, but the ammonia fumes were taking their toll. His movements were sluggish, his breathing labored. Lisa managed to cut the second ankle strap before he reached her. He grabbed her wrist, twisting until she dropped the scalpel, then shoved her into the wall. But the damage was done. With my legs free and the chest strap loose, I could move enough to work faster on the wrist restraints. The rope was definitely giving way. I just needed more time. Kat, who had been frozen in terror this whole time, suddenly darted forward. She didn't go for Dad or try to help me directly. Instead, she ran to the circuit breaker panel on the wall and yanked the main switch. The basement plunged into darkness. The only light came from the small window wells near the ceiling, casting everything in deep shadows. I heard Dad roaring in the darkness, stumbling over the scattered instruments on the floor. Someone crashed into the metal table, making it shake. My left wrist finally pulled free from the loosened rope. Working blind, I fumbled with the restraint on my right wrist. My fingers were numb from the tight binding, making it hard to find the knots. The ammonia fumes were dissipating slightly, but the air was still thick and choking. A hand touched my arm in the darkness. I flinched, but then felt familiar fingers working at the rope. Alice. Despite her injured shoulder, she was helping me with the final restraint. Together, we pulled and twisted until my right hand came free. I rolled off the table just as the lights flickered back on. Dad had found the breaker panel. He stood there, his face purple with rage and lack of oxygen, looking like a demon in the harsh fluorescent light. The doctor was slumped against the wall, his glasses askew, clearly in no condition to perform any procedure. My brothers were recovering too. Sebastian moved to block the stairs while Seba positioned himself between me and the window wells. They might have been struggling to breathe, but they were still determined to follow Dad's orders. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. The anesthetic the doctor had injected was taking effect, making my neck and throat completely numb. I couldn't even feel the familiar pain of my damaged vocal cords. Alice grabbed my arm, trying to steady me, but her own injuries made her weak. Dad advanced on us, stepping carefully over the broken glass and scattered instruments. Behind him, I saw Mom still on her knees by the stairs, but she was moving now. The ammonia bottle really put the fun in dysfunctional family gathering. Nothing says sibling teamwork like chemical warfare in a basement medical horror show. Alice just turned Dad's workshop supplies into the world's worst air freshener. Slowly, painfully, she was pulling herself up using the handrail. Lisa had recovered the scalpel and stood protectively in front of me and Alice. Kat crouched nearby, ready to hit the lights again if needed. For the first time in our lives, all 5 women in the family were united against Dad. He saw it too. The realization that his daughters were no longer obedient, terrified children seemed to stun him momentarily. Then his face hardened into something even more frightening. If he couldn't control us, he would destroy us. He grabbed a larger surgical knife from the floor, the blade glinting under the harsh lights. My brothers tensed, ready to support him. The doctor was trying to stand, mumbling something about needing to leave, but no one paid attention to him. That's when Mom made her move. She'd reached the top of the stairs and grabbed something from the kitchen. When she came back down, she was holding Dad's phone. Her fingers moved across the screen with surprising speed. Dad noticed and started toward her, but she held the phone high, showing the screen. She'd activated the video recording. Everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen, was being captured. More importantly, she'd started a live stream to her sister's account, the one relative who lived outside our community. The change in Dad was immediate. He understood the implications. Video evidence of him attempting illegal surgery on his daughter, of him attacking his family, streamed live to someone beyond his control. His carefully maintained image in the community would be shattered. He lunged for Mom, but she threw the phone to Lisa, who caught it and kept recording. Dad spun toward her, but Alice picked up another surgical instrument and held it defensively. Even injured, even voiceless, we were done being victims. The standoff lasted only seconds, but felt like hours. Dad's eyes darted between us, calculating his options. His brothers looked uncertain now, realizing they were being recorded committing serious crimes. The doctor was edging toward the stairs, clearly wanting no part of this anymore. Finally, Dad lowered the knife, not in surrender, but in tactical retreat. He knew he'd lost this battle. The surgery couldn't happen now, not with evidence already transmitted outside his sphere of influence. He'd have to find another way to maintain control, but I wasn't going to give him that chance. While he was focused on the phone, I grabbed the notepad from the medical tray where someone had placed it. My hands shook as I wrote, but my message was clear. I'm leaving, tonight. Try to stop me, and the full video goes to police. Dad read it, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He wanted to call my bluff, but Mom still had her phone out, still recording. Lisa had backed up to the stairs, ready to run if needed. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I wrote another note. All of us are leaving. Anyone who wants to come. I held it up so my sisters and Mom could see. Alice nodded immediately. Lisa took a step toward me. Even Kat, always the most fearful, moved closer to our group. Mom was the surprise. She walked down the stairs, past Dad like he wasn't even there, and stood with us. Her choice was made. 30 years of whispered subservience ended in that moment. Dad's control shattered completely. He threw the knife at the wall, where it stuck in the drywall, vibrating. He screamed at his sons to do something, but they hesitated. Without the threat of immediate violence, without the closed system of fear he'd created, they didn't know how to act. We moved as a unit toward the stairs. Dad tried to block us, but 5 determined women, even injured and voiceless ones, were more than he could handle alone. When he grabbed for me, Alice struck his arm with a surgical instrument she still held. When he reached for Mom, Lisa brandished the scalpel. The doctor had already fled up the stairs. We heard the front door slam as he abandoned the scene. My brothers backed away as we climbed the stairs, their confusion evident. They'd been raised to see us as weak, voiceless property. The sight of us fighting back broke their entire worldview. In the kitchen, I grabbed the car keys from the hook while my sisters gathered what they could carry. Mom pulled out a hidden envelope from behind the flour canister, cash she'd apparently been saving for years. We had maybe minutes before Dad regrouped and tried something else. Alice couldn't drive with her injured shoulder, so Lisa took the keys. We piled into Mom's van, 5 women fleeing decades of abuse. As we backed out of the driveway, I saw Dad standing in the doorway, his sons flanking him. His mouth was moving, probably screaming threats we couldn't hear over the engine. Lisa drove fast but carefully, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. None of us knew exactly where we were going, only that it had to be away. Mom directed her toward the highway using hand gestures, apparently having thought about escape routes before. 20 minutes later, we pulled into a rest stop to plan our next move. Mom's sister lived 3 states away, but she'd already responded to the video stream with messages offering help. Alice showed me her phone, tears streaming down her face as she read her aunt's words of support and shelter. I wrote on my notepad, "We need medical help first." Alice's shoulder was swelling badly, and Lisa's face was already bruising from where Dad had hit her. Mom nodded and searched for the nearest hospital on her phone. As we sat in that rest stop parking lot, 5 women with damaged voices but unbroken spirits, I realized something. Dad had been wrong about women's voices being dangerous. It wasn't our voices that threatened his control, it was our unity. Separately, we'd been victims. Together, we were unstoppable. The hospital was 40 minutes away, in a town large enough that Dad's influence wouldn't reach. As Lisa started the engine again, I caught her eye in the rearview mirror. She was crying but smiling, the first real smile I'd seen from her in years. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas and to switch drivers when Lisa got tired. By dawn, we'd crossed 2 state lines. Mom's sister had arranged a place for us to stay and contacted a women's shelter that could provide resources. At the hospital, the staff took one look at us and called in specialists. Alice's shoulder needed surgery. Lisa had a minor concussion. The doctors were horrified when they examined our throats and realized what had been done to us. They documented everything carefully, building a medical record that would support us if Dad tried to force us back. Mom's sister arrived that afternoon, a loud, strong woman who took one look at us and burst into tears. She'd suspected something was wrong for years but hadn't known how to help. She hugged each of us carefully, mindful of our injuries, and promised we were safe now. As the nurse prepared Alice for surgery, surgery, I caught my reflection in the window. 5 women with damaged voices but unbroken spirits. Dad had been wrong about women's voices being dangerous. It wasn't our voices that threatened his control. It was our unity. Separately, we'd been victims. Together, we were unstoppable. I touched my throat, feeling the familiar damaged tissue. But for the first time, it didn't feel like just a wound. It felt like proof of survival. We'd found our voices in the end. Not in sound, but in action, in courage, in refusing to be silenced anymore. Well, folks, that's been quite the journey to share. Makes you wonder what other stories are out there just waiting to unfold, doesn't it? Like the video, it helps more than you think.